Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. In this video, I will rank all 66 Agatha Christie novels, and I've never actually done this before as I ranked by series, and have been meaning to do this for a while now, and I finally decided now since I've reached 2,000 subscribers, which happened to be fair quite a bit ago, I thought this would be the perfect time to do this video. And if you are new to my channel, just be warned that when I first started this a few years ago, I did rank the Christie novels by series and other authors as well. And I said they were spoiler free. They really weren't all that much spoiler free. That was a bit of a lie, but in this video, I promise it's spoiler free. So just be careful if you're going back through some of those older videos. I promise this video is spoiler free. And I will go through all 66 novels, giving my thoughts on them and explanation for their rankings. I will also post on the screen the ranking for each novel within their series, either Poirot, Marple, or standalone. The standalone just being the non-Poirots or Marple. Some of them, like the Tommy and Tuppence, are, I guess, technically not standalones, but whatever. And I will post the old ranking and the current ranking, as the order has changed quite a few of these. So before I begin, make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel, and join in the Discord if you haven't already. Link in the description below. Starting off at the bottom at number 66 is Christie's worst novel. That's probably of no surprise to anyone. It's Postern of Fate, the final Tommy and Tuppence novel, and the final novel Christie wrote in her lifetime. And what is there to say about this book that hasn't already been said? It never should have been published. This is Christie clearly at her worst. I mean, the book makes no sense. The plot is incoherent, it's scattered. Christie rambles on and on about nonsense, often losing the plot and her train of thought. What little plot there is simply not interesting or clear. It's not developed at all, nor is it particularly interesting. Even in Christie's worst novels, there's like a little something in there that at least the concept would be intriguing. I mean, this one isn't. The plot takes forever to get going. Like, Tuppence is going to like a rummage sale for like half of the book, and eventually there's a murder that is never explained why it happens or why anyone would even care about the original murder plot that happened like 50 to 60 years ago. The dates are not consistent. The murderer is someone who literally shows up in the last 20 pages with no explanation as to who they are, why they committed the present day murder, why anyone should care. This book is all over the place, and Posture of Fate is certainly one of the worst mystery novels of all time. Certainly one of the worst novels of all time, if it even qualifies as a mystery. Now, in its favor, I will say, I guess the Tommy and Tuppence and Albert content is fun. They're always delightful. I mean, we have so little Tommy and Tuppence and Albert in these novels. They only have four novels, and this is one of them. So I guess it's nice to see them, what they're up to, and all that. You know, especially in their old age. And despite the rambling and even at times mislabeling dialogue tags, I find Postern of Fate easier to read than some of the thrillers I'll be talking about very soon. And the plus is that in some ways, this book is Christie reminiscing about her past. And I think Christie always does well when she reminisces about the past. Again, this book an exception. You know, the house, the greenhouse, the dog, the rocking horses. These are all fond memories of Christie's childhood, and I appreciate her incorporating them into the story, even if it's done extremely poorly. But this novel never should have been published, and Christie was never diagnosed with dementia in her lifetime, so it's not appropriate for us to say she had dementia or assume she did, but it's widely speculated that she did, and this novel is often used as proof. There were studies done on this novel. It feels exploitive, honestly, and this book should have been rejected by publishers, or at least heavily edited, or maybe, had a ghostwriter even. Instead, publishers left it largely intact, and many critics of the day gave this glowing reviews. They acted like nothing was wrong. I don't know if they didn't read it or they paid to say nice things about it. I don't know. So not much redeeming here from Postner to Fate. So it lands very clearly at the bottom. It's not even close at number 66. And we're starting a streak of standalone thrillers here, starting with number 65 with Passenger to Frankfurt. And a lot of this book just doesn't make all that much sense to me. It makes more sense than Posture of Fate does, I will say that. And I think there's like a gem of interesting discussion going on here. And to be fair, I think the political intrigue of this book, I think, is more relatable nowadays than was when I first read it 20-ish plus years ago. And I've seen this book being discussed and actually liked a lot more recently, so maybe it is having a bit of a renaissance, but for me, I just don't particularly care for it. Christie, talks a lot about how worried she is about the state of the world, and although I do think Passenger Frankfurt gets a bit into the old lady complaining about the state of the world, also, this book's plot is just really implausible. It's honestly like borderline fantasy. I'm always willing to let more go in a thriller novel because it's a thriller novel, and they're all a little bit quirky and a little bit weird, but this one's just farcical, and it's farcical in a way that I can't take seriously. Sir Stafford Nye isn't a bad character, I suppose, so there's that, and at least this book is coherent, which puts it above Postern of Fate. I think some of the things that happen are a little fun, like, Sir Stafford Nye getting drugged in the airport and all these weird well, I shouldn't say, I don't want to be spoilery here, but there's things going on here that are at least interesting. And again, this is a late career Christie, so her skills have waned quite a bit in terms of her writing ability. And I don't think it's implausible that in maybe 10 years time this novel might creep up on the list a little bit. It does seem that's having a bit of a renaissance lately, so at least there's that. But for now, it lands here at number 65. At number 64, another standalone thriller, They Came to Baghdad. And to be honest, I barely remember this novel. This might be the Christie novel I know the least well. This is a spy thriller with our heroine, Victoria Jones, who is probably the most insufferable heroine in a Christie novel. Just incredibly annoying and fairly useless. This book is a little bit better plotted than Passenger to Frankfurt, which doesn't really say much. I think there are some interesting points raised, but this book just jumps from scene to scene. It's like Christie just throwing various things at the wall and included them all because nothing stuck. It's not particularly well plotted, interesting, or sensical. It sort of reads as if Christie were planning this out as she was writing, and the book is also just ridiculous at points, and while Christie thrillers are often silly, this one is hard to take seriously. As I will get to a little while later, there are diverting thrillers from Christie that are actually good. This is not one of them, and I never think about this book. This might actually be the least important book in all of Christie's bibliography, so I have They Came to Baghdad at number 64. At number 63, and what do you know, yet another thriller. This one a little better, and that is Destination Unknown. And this book has some things going for it, especially when compared to They Came to Baghdad. I mean, for one, the story is simply better and more interesting. The idea of Hilary Craven, a much better character than Victoria Jones, posing as the wife of a nuclear scientist is at least intriguing. I find Destination Unknown to be better than They Came to Baghdad in every way. It's more coherent, it's more logical, it's more entertaining. Now, is this novel good? I mean, not really. It still suffers from most of the same problems many of these standalone thrillers do. And the truth is that Christie simply isn't at her best in these thrillers, especially these mid to late career thrillers where it really seemed like she was phoning it in because she had other non-literary projects going on and she needed to put one out this year. And she would just write a thriller when she needed to rush a book out because she would admit that in the thriller she didn't have to plan anything. And Destination for me just never really did anything. I don't really enjoy this book, but it is a noticeably better quality than the ones below it. So Destination Unknown comes in at number 63. At number 62, the final of these truly mediocre standalone thrillers, The Secret of Chimneys. And I've mentioned many times on this channel, The Secret of Chimneys is my least favorite Christie novel in terms of my personal likability, but I don't assess purely on my personal enjoyment, although that is a factor. But I just do not like this book. But in its favor, I mean, there's at least a charm to it that a lot of readers have affection for. And while I don't, I can see it, and I do think the ridiculousness of it is much more intentional than in the previous books I've talked about already. There is more of a murder plot going on in these, and, it's at least something in its favor. I also think this book is slightly more important to the canon because it leads into the Seven Dials mystery, which is a thriller I actually do like. But still, this is not a great book. It's very sloppy, incoherent mess at times. There's weird, like, royal shenanigans that's just not credible, and a lot of over the top antics that I suppose we're supposed to find enjoyable and funny. I don't but I think the intentionality is there. And because this book introduces us to some recurring characters like Battle, like Bundle, like Bill Eversley, it at least feels more important, more relevant to the Christie canon. It feels more connected to the other stories. So I put The Secret of Chimneys at number 62. At number 61, the lowest Poirot on the list, and we're actually starting a streak here of subpar Poirots, starting with Elephants Can Remember. And this one obviously suffers from the perceived decline in Christie's abilities. It's not as bad or as noticeable as in Postern of Fate, but it's still there. It is noticeable. You have information coming out of nowhere. We get repeated conversations that reveal either no new information or simply misremembered later on. So much of this novel is Poirot or Mrs. Oliver visiting old women who take 20 pages to say nothing and ramble on, and it doesn't make any sense. This book fails to accomplish its message. The message of Elephants Can Remember is that people, especially the elderly, never forget, but they do. None of the so-called elephants in this book provide any useful information to Poirot or Mrs. Oliver. They don't remember the situation with the Ravenscrofts at all. And it's sad because a reader will get the sense that Christie is defending herself against claims that she's no longer capable of excellent work she once did, and she fails to make that claim. Christie also seemingly did not remember what she wrote because there are times when Poirot or Mrs. Oliver are discussing clues that the reader has not been presented with as if we had. And they reference to, like, oh, such and such person said this, but that person never said that. And this is technically a murder mystery, and it's more entertaining than the previous titles, which is why it's above them, but like barely so. I mean, the mystery is extremely easy to solve and also involves twins, which is a cop out and a cheap trick in my opinion. But the story does work, and at least it makes sense. Like, you can figure out what's going on, which is enough to place Elephants Can Remember at number 61. At number 60, another Poirot, really the quintessential Poirot thriller, and that's The Big Four, another thriller, this time with Poirot and Hastings bouncing around Europe tracking a criminal gang. I think there are little gems of fun and intrigue here, and I actually do enjoy the shenanigans of this book. It's slightly unhinged, sloppy, and incoherent, but there is a reason for that. I mean, this book is really a short story collection merged into a novel, and I mean, it's not done in a particularly clever way. I mean, Christie did this because she needed to fulfill a bad contract she wanted out of. But still, there are segments here that are good. I've always enjoyed the leg of mutton murder, the chess murder, and a lot of the antics from Poirot and Hastings are just funny. Like, Poirot has like an exploding cigar at one time. It's just like, it's ridiculously wild, but funny. And, The Big Four has an overt humor to it that I find endearing and whimsical. Now, this is not a particularly great book still. I mean, you can feel a disconnect between many of the different little stories that are going on. And you could tell these are short stories sort of glued together with no connective tissue between them. They don't fit together smoothly, and the plot dives into the nonsensical at times. But again, this is at least an entertaining read, much more so than the ones below it. So I have The Big Four at number 60. At number 59, and this is where the list became a little bit more difficult to put together. I mean, those bottom 7 books were clear, but here is where we start getting less and less certain, and we also see a noticeable step up in quality. At number 59, I have Christie's lowest ranked, what I would call like her true mystery novel here, and that is Hickory Dickory Dock. And I mean, obviously, the terrible depiction of many of the people of color in this novel, as well as ethnic whites, is a major factor here. It's so prevalent and unavoidable in this book. It totally ruins it. And that's probably what this book is most talked about and most notable for. And this is not a case of like a fleeting mention, it's all over the place. And I've talked about it previously. I don't want to get into it again, but even beyond that, the mystery is just simply not good. It's not up to Christie's usual quality or even like her lesser quality. Like, there's nothing clever going on. The murder plot feels very contrived. The characters are not interesting. There's just a lot of ridiculous things happening, such as someone stealing light bulbs so they don't get recognized by the police. Like, what is that? I'm not even entirely sure why the first victim is murdered. It's not really explained, or at least explained in a satisfying, clear way. Hickory Dickory Dock needed to be revamped because at least the initial plot here of the theft ring is at least like interesting and unique. Why is someone stealing all of these odd objects? That's an intriguing concept, but it goes in directions that just simply are not interesting. We do get a lot of fun Miss Lemon content. I mean, Miss Lemon really does not appear so much in the novels, so that's a notable plus. But Hickory Dickory Dock largely flops as a mystery. Like, the execution of the concept of this novel is just simply not very good. And also, you have all the other really uncomfortable things going on, but it is a true mystery, and a flop of a true mystery is significantly better than a flop of a thriller, so it lands at number 59. At number 58, another mediocre Poirot, but now we're getting into the books here that have some merit to them. From this point forward, I probably am more positive than negative on these novels, and at number 58, I have Third Girl. And this is a novel that I've come to personally enjoy a lot more, but unfortunately, that doesn't really help it on this list because it's heavily flawed in very blatant ways that's hard to get over. I appreciate what Christie tries to do here. I mean, she's writing in the 1960s in a time and world that's increasingly unfamiliar to her. A lot of the characterizations come across as like Steve Buscemi, how do you do, fellow kids meme? And Christie seems very out of touch here, although I will admit some of the digs at Norma and David's appearance are brutal in a fun way. Like, she's always talking about how Norma looks like she needs a bath. The plot is heavily flawed, involves really just a lot of cheap tricks that are stale and overused by 1966, and also just not particularly credible. Like, I'm always willing to suspend some credibility for the sake of a good mystery, but this one requires a sacrifice far larger than what anyone should be willing to make. The plot also drags considerably because of all the padding and stalling going on. Poirot at one point doesn't even recognize the victim's name when it's mentioned, and that's just a way to stretch the plot. I mean, there's one of the worst red herrings in a Christie novel in this book that's also not particularly interesting, takes up way too much page space, and is clearly a red herring from the start. I think the book opens well enough with Norma going to Poirot, calling him old, and running away, claiming she thinks she committed a murder. This is a great opening, and I like Mrs. Oliver in this as well. I mean, her antics with Poirot were a lot of fun, but there are also better Mrs. Oliver novels than this one. I think Third Girl has some minor points going for it, but they don't come close really to overshadowing its many flaws. And I think of this book as one of those ones that's a lot more interesting, like discussing and thinking about, than it is when you're actually reading it. So I have Third Girl here at number 58. At number 57, continuing on with this trend of, I guess, subpar Poirots, with Christie's least favorite novel, The Mystery of the Blue Train. And I've talked about this before, that I don't think book is as nearly as bad as Christie said it was. Not even close, actually. But I believe this is the first book we've come across that has dropped a place in the rankings relative to where I had it the last time. And that's not really for any specific reason, just like the mood I was in at the time. Like, it does have some issues, mainly that it's not really that interesting. This is an expansion of a short story called Plymouth Express, and I think this type of story just simply worked better as Plymouth Express and the short story. We have a lot of classic thriller tropes in this traditional mystery novel, and it all works, but I just don't think the novel is fascinating in the way so many Christie novels are. But I will say, I think the solution is fine. Like, it's not like the best ever, but it all works and it's all satisfying. Catherine Gray is a good character I've always liked. I don't think she's necessarily an all-time great character, but she is a good, solid character, and I think that speaks to the book's main problem, is that the best parts of it are just fine. There's nothing in this book that really stands out to me. Plus, we have a lot of like jumping around from place to place, and there's also a ghost, which, the supernatural here is a pretty big knock for me, even though, again, the ghost isn't really all that important. The mystery of the blue train is much better than Christie gave it credit for, but I still think in like the grand scheme of all of her novels, again, not particularly stand out, so I have it at number 57. At number 56, we have the book that swapped places with the Blue Train, and that is Murder on the Links. And like the Blue Train, I think this book is just fine. It has no standout moments to me, but I do find the plot just a little cleverer, which is why I switched the two books. I've always enjoyed like the Poirot Giraud rivalry here. That is the biggest standout for me in this book, but I mean, there are issues here. I mean, most of the backstory is told to us in a very long and tedious info dump. It really drags the story out, and I've always felt that info dump really harms this novel as it makes the book boring. Like, when I think of the murder and the links, I think about this info dump and like how dreadful it is and how it like ruins the entire novel. I never really cared for like Hastings' like romantic interludes, and I know that's probably an unpopular opinion, and in this book I just find it really just not that interesting. And again, not that there aren't like clever things about this book, and this is certainly the best mystery I've talked about so far. There are some very good clues, with one in particular involving Madame Renal being really a standout. Again, I won't say what it is, but if you know this book, you know what I'm talking about. But I think a lot of the intrigue is just sucked out of this book by things like the info dump and a heavy focus on things I just did not care about and did not find particularly interesting. I think in the past I probably was too harsh on this novel. Like I did really bash it. I think the first time I ranked these books, and I was overcritical of it. But and I maintain my criticisms of this book are legitimate. But I do think this book is definitely much better than I gave it credit for in the past. So Murder on the Links comes in at number 56. At number 55, continuing on with Poirot novels that I like more than most people do, and here we have The Clocks. And I've always enjoyed this novel because I love unknown corpses. It's my favorite like niche trope in mystery novels. The idea that no one in the book admits to knowing the dead body is so intriguing to me, and the possibilities are endless. And I think that part of the plot plays out fun, even though some of it is a bit of a slog. The characters are not particularly interesting, and they all sort of like blend together into like a sort of mash of one character who's not particularly distinct. And most fatally is the subplot that really takes over from the murder plot, with Colin Lamb looking into some type of espionage thing going on. For whatever reason, in the 1960s, Christie started doing these like half mystery, half thriller novels like this one, and a few others I haven't talked about yet. And this is the worst of them. I mean, this book is really two separate plots running side by side and never meet. It doesn't know what it's doing, and it's a very long book, and even the murder plot has a lot of flaws to it. It is solvable barely, but there's a lot of like withheld information, such as like the inspiration of like where this murder plot came from, which is contained in information we're not told about and can't be told about because it would ruin the whole thing. And I don't feel the writing is very sharp either. I mean, I enjoy The Clocks more than most people do, but that's all on the mystery plot side of it, and even that's not like superior. The murder of the unknown dead man in Miss Penmarch's house, but the espionage stuff is pretty bad. It's vague, it's unrelatable. I think Colin Lamb and Sheila Webb are pretty bad characters, not very invested in them. And also, I mean, just like it's also very simple to solve. Like, if you think about it for a minute, it was not a good spy plot, and it really drags down the entire novel. Which, even though I thought the murder plot was clever, again, it's still flawed, and the end result is a novel that falls far short of its potential. And then you have other issues of like Poirot not really being in this book, like he barely appears. And, my opinion of The Clocks has dropped quite a bit, so it lands at number 55. At number 54 is another book with a very similar problem, and this is the bottom ranked Miss Marple on the list, At Bertram's Hotel. And like The Clocks, At Bertram's Hotel has two plots, a barely there murder plot and a totally gonzo thriller that isn't interesting at all and overshadows the murder. I think the murder plot is better in The Clocks, but I have this one above it because I think the murder plot is at least somewhat connected to the thriller plot, even if it's just barely there. I also think the writing and the characters are a lot better in At Bertram's Hotel. I also think the descriptions in this book are very good. I know everything about Bertram's Hotel. It is very well described, and I enjoy Miss Marple's memories of the hotel and how that provided an important clue. But it's simply not enough to make up for the lackluster everything else. The murder plot is barely there, and the twist is, one Christie's used half a dozen times by this point already. It's extremely easy to see through. It's not interesting. And, I said I know the characters are better than in the clocks, but they're still pretty bland for the most part, even if they are supposed to be like more adventurous than normal. But I mean, Bess Sedgwick is a pretty standout character. She's a good one. Canon Pennyfather is fun. And even like the blandest characters are still better than the blandest characters in the clocks. And I think the word that best describes At Bertram's Hotel for me is disappointing. I remember having such high hopes the first time I read this book and being let down catastrophically. Now, having reread this book somewhat recently for review last year, I did enjoy it more. Like I did see more merit to it, but I just don't think it's enough to really move it up any higher on this list. Nor do I think it's enough to not make this the worst Miss Marple novel. So I have At Bertram's Hotel at number 54. At number 53, back to some thrillers, and these are the better thrillers, but they still have some issues here and there. And at number 53, I have The Seven Dials Mystery, and this actually fell quite a bit from where I had it amongst the standalones previously. I've always liked this book, but when compared to the books that are left, like I couldn't justify putting it any higher. Like my opinion did not change on The Seven Dials Mystery, but my opinion of the like thrillers sort of near it went up. A lot of the characters are fun, like Lord and Lady Coot. I've never been a fan of Bundle, and I think Battle is a bit dull and underused here. But there's always been something about this book I've enjoyed. It's kind of crazy and a lot of like sarcastic, but it is sort of well plotted. And unlike most other Christie thrillers, at least the ones I've talked about already, we're not supposed to be taking the Seven Dials mystery seriously. I think we're legitimately supposed to care about the people and events in Passenger to Frankfurt and Destination Unknown. I personally don't. But in Seven Dials Mystery, you don't care about them all that much. You're not supposed to. It's supposed to be fun and fleeting. And that's the fun of the Seven Dials Mystery, in that it's lighthearted and almost a parody. Mysterious figures meeting with clocks on their hooded masks is just ridiculous. But I also think it's the novel's biggest selling point, and that mystery itself is pretty good, especially by thriller standards. There is a coherent plot, and there's also more of like a traditional murder going on. Again, it does have some of those same issues Christie thrillers, especially the adventure thrillers, tend to have. There's this like invention that's being targeted that's like a useless MacGuffin. It's vague, and the stakes aren't clearly defined, and the stakes aren't don't feel the biggest, and it is an adventure thriller. But like I said, there's a charm to this novel I've always liked, so I have The Seven Dials Mystery here at number 53. At number 52, a thriller very much in the same vein as The Seven Dials Mystery, and that is Why Didn't They Ask Evans? And I'm probably higher on this book than I've ever been before. I actually think there's a pretty big gap between Why Didn't They Ask Evans and The Seven Dials Mystery. I think the Hugh Laurie adaptation did a lot to push me in that direction. I also really enjoyed this the last time I read it for the retrospective a couple of years ago. And I just find the overall premise of this book to be just too bizarre, especially like the cryptic title clue and some of the other events that occur. If you're a longtime listener, not the biggest fan of cryptic last words, but this book is a lot of fun. Bobby Jones and Frankie Derwent are both very fun characters, and there's some intrigue here that's pretty decent. They're actually like really like Tommy and Tuppence coded, though not a spectacular mystery and thriller here. It's still fairly good. And I know I harp a lot about the cryptic title question, but it's just something I've never been able to like wrap my head around. Like I'm always willing to suspend some belief for the sake of the story, but this one's just a little bridge a little bit too far for me. It's really ridiculous, and I often see comments from people trying to change my mind about it, and you know what, it's just not working. I'm very stubborn about it, but I enjoy this book and the characters, but it's mostly a thriller, and Christie just better at the more traditional mystery novels. And so Why Didn't They Ask Evans is a fairly decent Christie thriller, but I just really can't rank it much higher than here at number 52. At number 51, and I think here we're moving up another tier of Christie novels. These are novels that are enjoyable, but they have some issues. They're not like massively flawed, but they are still noticeably flawed. And at number 51 is a Miss Marple novel, and it's They Do It with Mirrors. And I've always liked this book whenever I analyze this novel, but there's just not a lot going on here. It feels like very short story coded, expanded into a novel. It doesn't like do anything interesting or unique. The plot feels very stretched out. There isn't enough here to sustain a full length novel. There's a very brief and short plot that's sort of padded out and embellished to barely make it into full length novel territory. And what it is there, it's not bad. It's far from Christie's best. And I think that just sums up They Do It with Mirrors. It's fine, but it pales in comparison to mostly everything else. And I think this book is one of the worst, if not the worst, offender of like the late book murders thrown in to extend the length of the novel. We have two very, very clunky late book murders that don't really contribute to the novel in an interesting or practical way. The murder solution is one of the easiest to solve, and while that's not always a bad thing, it does feel lackluster here. Christie unfortunately tries to obfuscate this with like really obvious red herrings and cliche tropes like a secret passageway, which are meant to direct us away from the truth, but are just so badly done they actually point us closer to the right direction. And if I'm being honest, this book feels like Christie phoned it in a little bit. And while it's a perfectly fine murder mystery, again, it simply isn't enough to compete with the entire Christie bibliography. She can do better and has done a lot better before, so They Do It with Mirrors comes in at number 51. At number 50, and this is a book I had at one point much higher on this list, about like 10 spots higher, until I reassessed the list and reflected upon it. I was like, you know what, this has to be lowered, and that is Halloween Party. And I think this is one of those novels whose plot is really good, but it just sort of falls apart when reading it. I think about this novel all the time, and I love the story. I love talking about the story and Poirot looking into these past murders Joyce may have witnessed. It's a very good story, plot wise, but the problem is sort of in the writing and in the presentation. There are a lot of plot holes, or they're not even really plot holes, but just the execution of this plot is where the novel suffers. It's a lot of repetition and just things happening in a sort of illogical order. It's not really streamlined as a novel, and it's burdened by this. There are a lot of like unanswered questions and plot lines that just aren't wrapped up. And Halloween Party does not have great characters either. I mean, the depiction of children is weird in this book. And to be fair, the depiction of children are often very weird in Christie novels, but this one is really bad. Joyce is described terribly, and no one cares that she's dead. Miranda is sexualized, which is really gross. Leopold is pretty awful. And the adult characters aren't all that interesting either. But there are interesting clues, and the plot is interesting. Like, I love the intrigue of looking into these past murders Joyce may have witnessed. I love the Mrs. Oliver Poirot banter, and I think the descriptions are great. Like, I know exactly what Woodley Common looks like. I love the descriptions of Nicholas and Desmond, who are these like two teenage boys very much out of the 1960s. There's a lot to like here, but there's also a lot of flaws and problems. I wanted to place this higher. My instinct was to put this higher, but upon reflecting it more, I did have to lower it quite a bit. So Halloween Party comes in at number 50. At number 49 is a Poirot novel that I think just gets outclassed by the others, and that is Death in the Clouds. And to me, Death in the Clouds is sort of the epitome of this tier of Christie novels that's good, but doesn't stand out and has some issues. Christie has 66 full length novels, with the majority of them being, iconics and classics, but something is going to get forgotten and something has to fall behind. And I feel like Death in the Clouds is a book that often is forgettable and falls behind. It doesn't do anything majorly wrong, but it doesn't do anything majorly right either. And I'm always forgetting about this. I don't know if anyone is like familiar with the website Sporkle, but there's a Sporkle quiz to name every Agatha Christie novel, and it's all mixed up, so you can't go by in order. Death in the Clouds was the 66th one I remembered. This is the one I forgot the most. And, I I think that says something about the novel. It's a perfectly acceptable and passable book. A murder on an airplane via method unknown, maybe blowpipe, maybe not. That's a fairly excellent concept, and it plays out well as also. I think you have to stretch your mind a little bit. It's not unbelievable, but you do have to accept certain things you don't have to in other Christies. And again, it's a perfectly fine murder mystery on an airplane. It has this jaunty, adventurous feel to it, typical of the 1930s. But again, I just think we have a lot more things to believe that like aren't easily believable, and the one-time characters don't stand out. They're fairly bland. Like maybe Norman Gale is okay, but the likes of Lady Horbury, the archaeologist father and son, Venetia Kerr, they're all just really forgettable. Even our heroine Jane Grey is not a particularly good example of the young female heroine in a Christie novel. There are many just much better books, and I think Christie does everything she does in this book better in many others. It's fun, it's diverting, but it can't compete with the others, so Death in the Clouds comes in at number 49. At number 48 is a Poirot with a bit of a unique feel to it, and that is 1 2 Buckle My Shoe. And this is a traditional murder mystery with some political thriller intrigue thrown in. And I think it's one of the better examples of Christie doing this. Christie does an excellent job of blending these two things while getting her points across in a way that's not particularly preachy. The mystery plot and the thriller aspects are combined. It's not two separate stories. And I think the murder is fun. I've always loved Poirot in the dentist chair. Like, I wish we spent a lot more time with Poirot at the dentist because it's really an insufficient amount and it's the best part of the novel. We should have more like murder mysteries set in dentist office. There's some very good character work we don't always see in thrillers. Again, I don't find the plot, however, to be like the most riveting, and Christie takes this in directions that I think she misses opportunities. Like, I would have preferred a lot more focus on the dentist's office because that's well done. Christie's novels almost always make a larger point about something and it feels very natural. Here, I think Christie tries a little too hard to make sure the reader picks up on those points. It's not preachy, like I said, but it is a little forced. It's a little much. Let the message speak for itself. Let the reader pick up on that. You don't have to like shove it in the reader's face. And Christie executes this book well in regards to what she wanted to do with it. I enjoy this book, but it's real also just not what I prefer from a Poirot novel. I don't think it's what people expect from a Poirot novel. It is a matter of taste, but I will say this is another novel that my opinion of has gone up gradually over time. Like, I used to regard this as a pretty bad novel, but now I actually like this book. I think it's fine. It has a lot of to redeem for it. 1 2 Buckle My Shoe has some things to speak in its favor, and while I appreciate aspects of it, I am left largely wanting something else. So I have 1 2 Buckle My Shoe here at number 48. At number 47, continuing on with some of the better adventure thrillers with The Man in the Brown Suit. And when I reviewed this novel, I said that was the most I've ever enjoyed this book, which is true, and it has moved up quite a bit on the standalone list, which probably boosted it up this list a lot. It was very tempting. I think it's sort of natural to put this right above Why Didn't They Ask Evans, since there's a lot of similarities between the two, but I did bump it up higher on the list because I do think this is in a different tier than like Why Didn't They Ask Evans or the Seven Dials mystery. It's a very fun, jaunty adventure, and you almost don't care at how ridiculous it gets because it's not meant to be a serious novel. And despite that, the plot is mostly grounded until the end, which is a bit of a knock onto itself that it gets just too ridiculous. But especially in a thriller, you can suspend credibility for the plot, but even this was a little bit much. Anne Bedingfeld is an all-time fantastic Christie character of the adventurous young woman trope, and she has a lot of fun moments. I think the chapters aboard the Kilmorton Castle ship are great in the way Christie can both move the plot forward and deliver on character. But again, this is a thriller. It's actually the highest ranked adventure thriller without a major recurring character. I mean, I don't really consider Colonel Race a major recurring character, but this is also probably his best appearance for Colonel Race content, at least. And there are murders in this book, but they aren't essential to the plot, which is fine, and we still get an explanation for them. There's still a mystery here. But because this is mostly a thriller, it is hard to justify putting it much higher on this list, but this is still a very good book. I highly recommend it. So The Man in the Brown Suit finished here at number 47. At number 46, we're returning to Tommy and Tuppence with By the Pricking of My Thumbs. I think there's an argument this book should be below The Man in the Brown Suit, but I think the beginning of this book is fantastic. The opening scenes of Mrs. Lancaster creeping Tuppence out in the nursing home while talking about children in the fireplace is so creepy. I love it. It's iconic. And we have all the nursing home shenanigans with Aunt Ada and Mrs. Coco. It's so good. If it weren't for this opening section, By the Pricking of My Thumbs would be below The Man in the Brown Suit for sure, and probably a couple spots below that, because the rest of the novel is pretty mediocre, but the opening third or so is so strong and so enjoyable. I felt that coupled with this being a Tommy and Tuppence justified its placement here, but the rest of the book leaves a lot to be desired. It's very scattered, as if Christie didn't know where to take the plot, so she just wrote without any real plan. But even these mediocre parts are better than most other thriller content. We have Tuppence being hit on the head, and Tommy and their daughter trying to find her. Albert gets into a whole bunch of shenanigans. It all makes sense, but the end is baffling, not because of confusion over what happened, but just baffling over why Christie headed in the direction she did. I feel like there were like other options she could have gone with that would have been more satisfying as a solution. And this book is full of coincidences as well, like Tuppence recognizing the house and the painting, and also some off moments from Tommy just being like really mean and nasty to Tuppence, which is out of character. It's a bit sloppy and it does go off the rails. Again, the first third or so of this novel saves it from a lower ranking, but By the Pricking of My Thumbs finishes here at number 46. At number 45 is a book with the exact same problem as By the Pricking of My Thumbs, but with a totally different plot in Murder is Easy. This book starts off fantastically with Lavinia Pinkerton telling Luke Fitzwilliam a series of murders in her village of Witchward under Ash, and that she can predict the next victim, which comes true, and she herself is also murdered. The opening is great. There are a lot of murders in this book, and the initial setup is fantastic, but it does go off the rails. Christie gets carried away, I think, with all of these murders, and never lets any one of them really shine, which, to be fair, I mean, the victims themselves are not that important. But the ending gets ridiculous. It gets wild and out of control. It makes sense. Like, nothing here doesn't fit or not works, or there's no big plot holes or anything, but it's just not the cleanest novel she put out. And I think the best parts of By the Pricking of My Thumbs are better than the best parts of Murder is Easy, and the weakest parts are roughly the same. But I put Murder is Easy ahead of By the Pricking of My Thumbs because I think Murder is Easy's problems start a lot later, and it is more of a traditional murder mystery. And I always do sort of defer to a traditional mystery when two books are about equal in my mind. So Murder is Easy comes in at number 45. At number 44, another Miss Marple, and I suspect this may be a controversial placing having hit this low, but here I have Nemesis, which actually did move down in my Marple rankings relative to other books. I know a lot of people thought it should be higher, and I actually wound up lowering it, but I know people love this book, and I love this book, and I think this book does a lot well. It does things a lot better than some of the next few books I have above it. I think the Miss Marple content is exquisite. In many ways, this is the final Marple novel. It feels like an ending to Miss Marple, and it was the last one Christie wrote, but not the last published. And Miss Marple finally gets that notoriety in the end. And while she is pursuing justice for others, this case is totally for her. She embarks on this adventure for herself and herself only. And I love the Miss Marple content in this book and all of those little moments with her, like fantasizing about how she's going to spend the reward money and the real subtle ways she gets information. But none of that really can cover up how many flaws and plot holes this book has. This book doesn't make any sense. There's no reason Mr. Raphael would send Miss Marple and make this request without telling her anything about what she's supposed to be doing, including like what death she is looking into, who should she speak with, etc. This is a man obsessed with justice, and yeah, this does add a lot of intrigue, but it's completely nonsensical. It's a novel written for the reader's interest and not necessarily that one that really makes particular sense in universe. And then we have times where people say very cryptic things, and Miss Marple just wonders, she goes, I wonder what they meant by that, instead of just like asking that person what they meant, we have cryptic last words. We have a totally incredible means of murder, pushing a boulder on someone. We have a lot of plot holes. We have an unfortunate clue of someone being colorblind and like mistaking things they saw that they really shouldn't have been mistaking, and it doesn't make any sense. And while there are some strong characters, most of them are completely forgettable. They blend together and wind up being mostly irrelevant to the plot. There are many like gross references to Michael Raphael essentially being a rapist, but that's no reason he should be in jail, which is not great commentary. And keeping in mind, we're supposed to be pulling for Michael Raphael, we're supposed to feel bad for him. And this book is heavily flawed, and the positives are very, very high, but just they don't overtake the negatives, unfortunately. It's a saving grace is that this Marple novel has such great content for her, is extremely strong, and the plot is good enough. And, like, if you can overlook the many issues with it, but honestly, I can't overlook these issues. There's so many issues, and the other novels don't have this problem. And honestly, I considered putting Nemesis even lower, but I did decide against it because I love this book. It's really good as a story, so it lands here at number 44. At number 43, and I'm sure this is another unpopular choice here because when I ranked every Poirot novel, I got complaints about how low this book was, and you know what? Didn't change my mind at all. And at number 43, I have Sad Cypress. And I understand why this book is so popular. The character work is very good. The love triangle between Eleanor and Roddy and Mary is one of the most iconic in Christie. I enjoy the structure of this story. It has a very unique structure with flashbacks and the present. The mystery itself is enjoyable to read, but some of the best clues of any Christie novel. I love the clue of the label. I will say no more, but if you've read this book, you know exactly what clue I'm talking about. But the murder mechanics of this book are bad. I would argue these are actually probably the worst plot mechanics in any of Christie's traditional mysteries in terms of her plotting them. Now, there are worse for sure in terms of creativity. The plot, though, is full of holes and major gaping holes. These are not small plot holes. Sometimes, you can take a plot and it works. And then when you really start thinking about it and you start pulling apart the plot, you can see the plot holes. This one, you don't have to do that. The plot holes are glaring. And this happens sometimes when Christie is focusing on other things rather than the mystery. And the mystery sort of becomes an afterthought. Like here, she's focusing so much on the characters and she does like A+ work on the characters, but it left the murder plot really not great. The murderer's plans make no sense. We're told the murder was planned, but the circumstances surrounding it render that impossible, and it is reliant entirely on chance. Moreover, the murderer almost kills the person they're trying to frame for the other murder. Like, the murderer, totally unprompted, also reveals their secret motive to Poirot, and Christie has to do this to play fair because there's really no other way to get this information out, even though it's in the killer's best interest to keep it a secret. And we have all that stuff about illegitimate children inheriting, which is also not possible. It doesn't work. It wouldn't happen. And the murderer's plot has no benefit, but the book treats it otherwise. And these are pretty big holes that are not easy to overlook. The plot fails without much digging or prying around. It just doesn't work. And it's a bit ironic that this book is a tribute to Dorothy L. Sayers and her novel Strong Poison, which is another excellent novel people love that has major gaping plot holes that don't work, despite everything else working in its favor. And it's a shame because the characters are good and there are good clues, but I just cannot overlook the plot holes. And the more I think of it, the lower my opinion gets, and I find more plot holes. Christie has shown dozens of times she can write excellent characters, craft a brilliant murder plot, and put everything together in a beautiful, entertaining way without issue. And Sad Cypress doesn't do that. Christie can do much better than this, and I cannot overlook the issues. So Sad Cypress comes in at number 43. At number 42 is a Marvel book that finished much higher than I would have guessed, and that is The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side, or just more simply, The Mirror Cracked. And I'll say my opinion of this book has changed a little bit and has gotten more positive. I still have the same issues with it. I think the solution is extremely obvious. The first time I read this book, I solved it before the murder even happened, and I did not know the famous real-life story that Christie claimed this book was not based on. And I would have guessed this one would have been lower on the list, but the way I assess mystery novels isn't solely based on how predictable the solution is. I think now I would give this book much more credit for its story. It's a decently told, interesting story, and I think it's much more enjoyable on a reread when you don't really care so much about how obvious the solution is. And I've really come to enjoy the plot of this novel much more than I ever had before. And there are rumors that Christie was actually told the novel was too obvious, so she had to fix it. So this actually could have been worse at one point if that's true. But this is a good story. It's not a strong mystery novel, but in terms of the story it tells, this is a success. But this is a mystery novel, and I do have to put some emphasis on that. The solution is good, but I think there are some clues that feel a little contrived, and I really hate this late book revelation that was just so bad and ridiculous. It added nothing. I have no idea why it was there. We also have late book murders that aren't great, but we also have the best content for this novel to talk about here, and that's the story of St. Mary Mead. This Mirror Cracked is a story about St. Mary Mead. This is the novel where we learn about the development of the village and all the changes happening there. Developments popping up, construction everywhere. Inch selling his cab company, Colonel Bantry died, Miss Weatherby died, and most importantly, Miss Marple is older and frailer. She falls, she gets injured, she can't garden anymore. And I find that the most fascinating and interesting part of this novel. I would read a whole book about that with no murder at all. And there are a lot more positives to this book than I gave it credit for in the past. But again, the solution is really obvious and has some like bad late book stuff going on. So I have The Mirror Cracked here at number 42. At number 41, moving back to Poirot for a little bit here, we have Dumb Witness. And my main problem with Dumb Witness is the repetition. This book is the epitome of criticism of Niall Marsh, in which we usually have a very dynamic opening and the plot drags a bit as everything is sort of rehashed when the detective enters. Again, I disagree that's a feature of Niall Marsh books, but that is a criticism hurled at her. But that is exactly the problem with Dumb Witness. This book is fine. The plot is strong. The clues are interesting. The mysterious atmosphere works. I like the little flair of the supernatural we get. It's just the middle section just rehashes everything we already know. The characters are fine, but I think in the grand scheme of Christie, they lack. Dumb Witness would be above like the halfway point for most authors, but this is an Agatha Christie novel, and the competition is starting to get a little tough at this point. And I actually do think you could argue this could be lower, like maybe it should be below Nemesis and Sad Cypress if those books didn't have plot flaws. Like Dumb Witness does not have a plot flaw. I do have to start weeding out books with flaws, and even though I enjoy Dumb Witness a lot, again, the repetition is just too much for me. And when I discuss Christie, even her worst books are often very good and enjoyable. Not like the very bottom of the list, but this sort of range of books below the halfway point, but not near the bottom. They're far better than any other authors in the same range. But Dumb Witness just falls victims here to there being a lot better books that don't repeat themselves. So I have it come in here at number 41. At number 40 is a book I actually thought would be lower on the list, and that is Cat Among the Pigeons. And this is probably the book where Christie is able to best blend a murder mystery plot with an adventure thriller. I still don't prefer this, but this is done competently. And there are times where, the Ramat thriller stuff feels very forced into the Meadowbank storyline, but it does come together in an interesting and satisfying manner. This isn't The Clocks or At Bertram's Hotel, where the two plots never meet and you have what amounts to two separate books in one. And I think this book has issues regarding like Poirot and that he's barely in it and doesn't come in until very late. We know Christie was a little tired of Poirot at this point. He also does some weird things like looking at girls' knees. That did not feel like a very Poirot thing to do. But I think the story is strong. I think the trick of this book is excellent and unexpected. I don't believe Christie does this in another novel. I think it's very well written. The chapter with Julia prying open the tennis racket while someone tries to break into her room is chilling. Miss Bulstrode is an all-time great character. Julia Upjohn, another great character. This is another novel, in my opinion, that has risen gradually over time, and I appreciate it more as time goes on. I think there is a lot to recommend this book, but I do wish maybe a little less thriller stuff going on, even though it is well incorporated into the story. So I have Cat Among the Pigeons here at number 40. At number 39, I have a Poirot novel that my opinion of changes very often, actually. Sometimes I think it's great, sometimes I think it's bad. And unfortunately for it right now, I am a bit lower on it than normal, and that is Dead Man's Folly. And had I made this video before the retrospective I made a couple of months ago, I would have this novel quite a few spots higher. I love The Murder Hunt, which is a lot of fun. Mrs. Oliver is a blast here. I think the mechanics are good, not superior, but they work, and they work in an interesting and intriguing manner. Christie does better in her best novels, which is why this one's below 38 others, but there's a lot to recommend here. I think of this novel as a very solid mystery that doesn't go too deep, if you know what I mean. This book is mainly for entertainment purposes. It doesn't explore like the issues of the day or make a profound point. And to be fair, I mean, it does provide commentary on the day, but just not as much as in many others. And I don't think the characters are the best here. There really aren't any standouts, but there's no duds either. And I think the ending is very good in that we actually don't see the culprits arrested, but ends on a very emotional note that I found to be well executed. I do think this is a novel in which the murderer's plan is creative and enjoyable, but a bit overblown. On my latest reread, as I mentioned in my retrospective, I did notice more plot holes, and there was also a much just simpler solution to go with this plot. But again, it's small enough that it's in the range of what I'm willing to forgive for the sake of a good story. But I think the real problem, as I talked about in that retrospective, is that this novel is written for the reader. And what I mean by that is a lot of the tricks and the deceptions are designed to fool a reader in a way that doesn't seem like practical in universe. The culprit is doing things and drawing attention to things that just like you wouldn't really do if you wanted to get away with murder. I just think of this book as one where Christie does things that she does better in many other stories. So I have Dead Man's Folly here at number 39. At number 38, I have Christie's very first published novel, The Mysterious Affair at Styles. And I did try to squeeze this into the top half, but there really just wasn't room. And Styles is sort of hurt by the fact that it is a first novel. It's the blueprint Christie always returned to. And because of that, she improved on the formula and her work as she established herself in future novels. She reuses this twist and the mechanics of Styles in future books and does those things better in other novels. And Styles feels very much like a classic murder mystery from the 19th century. The shadow of Arthur Conan Doyle still lingers over this plot. I know I said Christie established her formula here, and she did, but this is still before Christie's own unique style came into being. She had not yet revolutionized the genre. This book is never really mentioned among Christie's greatest, but this is arguably her most important novel, and possibly one of the most important mystery novels of all time. And it never gets the credit for it, and it's because it's overshadowed by all of other Christie's works. This almost feels like the perfect novel to give someone who isn't that into mystery novels because it's very basic, but that doesn't hinder or hold it back in any way. Again, there's early installment weirdness, but that makes it charming. And like I said, it is a first novel, and many, mystery authors' first novels are memorable and iconic, but as the author perfects his or her craft, they produce better works. And that's what happened here. Like, I wish this book could have been higher, but Mysterious Affair at Styles comes in at number 38. At number 37, and I'm surprised I have this book this high, and that is A Caribbean Mystery, which I did drop relative to other Marple novels. And I remember when I reviewed this book for the channel and noticing for the first time this story is a bit sloppy. It sort of marks that initial decline in quality of Christie in her late career, with her writing not being as strong as it used to be, but her creativity and plotting are still as strong as ever. But there are noticeable problems here, in ways that didn't really exist in prior Christie novels. And I think if I were to make this list like a year or 5 or whatever from now, I think A Caribbean Mystery probably would be even lower on this list, probably like in the mid 40s. And it is a book, in my opinion, has decreased over time. Like, I just haven't been able to get it out of my head, the issues with this book, the odd storytelling, the obvious and clunky red herrings. But I still think this is a very fun Miss Marple novel. I love seeing Miss Marple abroad, and she's very snarky in this one, even more so than usual. I mean, so many fun digs at Raymond West so many like criticisms of Mr. Raphael that are fun to read. The setting is excellently evoked, and I think the plot is a lot of fun. Major Palgrave talking about a wife or a husband murderer and then getting murdered himself, and the photo of said murderer disappearing and no one knowing really what he was saying because nobody listened to him. And I love some of the cluing that's going on, and I think the story here is excellent. I appreciate Miss Marple really taking charge of the situation and the investigation. She's very active in this one, and I still enjoy this book a lot, and I think it has a lot going for it, but my opinion of it is dropping, and it's dropping quickly, so I have it at number 37. At number 36, back to Poirot, and I have Murder in Mesopotamia. And obviously, the main issue here is how unbelievable the ending is. I've always thought criticism of the ending was overblown. Now, is it the most credible? No, but it's not as ridiculous as I think critics and readers love to claim. And other than that, I don't have any major problems. I always think of Murder in Mesopotamia as your standard Christie murder mystery. It's a very solid but unadorned mystery novel. It doesn't have any bells and whistles, but is still very intriguing and very entertaining. And I think the setting is done well. Christie really nails the archaeological setting. I mean, she knew it well, and she really demonstrates her knowledge of the region and archaeology in both the setting and the plot. The murder plot is sort of tangentially related to archaeology, but it does incorporate archaeology in the mechanics. And I don't think Murder in Mesopotamia does anything like special or noteworthy. It is a book that really doesn't come up very often when I'm making other videos. It's a good example of a strong, just typical mystery novel. I think the characters are sort of a mixed bag. I mean, Nurse Leatherin and Louise Liner are very good, but most of the male characters are just blah. And I do think it's a bit of a shame this novel doesn't receive more notoriety and praise because it is a very good novel. It really plays into Christie's strengths and is also an impossible crime, which Christie does not use very often. This really is a top-notch novel, but we're not even halfway through, and just some novels are going to get left behind here in sort of this middle void. Like, not everything can be at the top. So Murder in Mesopotamia finishes at number 36. At number 35, a Miss Marple novel my opinion of has increased quite a bit lately, and that is Sleeping Murder, the final Miss Marple and the final Christie novel to be published. And I've always thought of this one as sort of below average, but since I've started doing this channel, I find myself appreciating it more and more, and especially since I've just very recently reread this novel for the retrospective that's coming up. And, it's been adapted a lot, and I think watching all of these adaptations grew my appreciation for this novel because I was able to see all of the little nuances of the novel. There isn't necessarily a lot going on in Sleeping Murder, but what is there is very good. And we have a great opening of Gwenda Reed thinking she's psychic or going insane and remembering she witnessed a murder of Helen, whom she has no idea who Helen is. I think the scene depicting the murder of Lily Kimball is one of the best passages in any Christie novel. I love the depiction of the victim Helen and how she's not really anything we were told she was. And Sleeping Murder is a good story, and I haven't appreciated it until very recently. And there's so many little nuances going on here with the characters and with the plot and the cluing. It's extremely satisfying when you pick them up. It just so everything fits so perfectly in that very like Miss Marpleian way. Now, I do think the murder probably lacks a little intrigue in terms of mechanics. I don't think any of the clues of this novel are ones I bring up very often. They're very satisfying, but they're also, there's the type of clue that I think only works in this novel. And I've always been critical of certain characters in this novel who, they're not really all that viable as suspects. And it is one of my pet peeves when they're just characters who we're supposed to believe are suspects, but they're not treated in a way that, like, really makes you think they're suspects. But Sleeping Murder is a novel whose overall storyline is much stronger as a novel than as a mystery novel. Miss Marple helping this young couple investigate a murder and then warning them against doing so is fascinating. And while I think the mystery, it doesn't come together as tightly and as neatly as I would have liked. It sort of doesn't matter because it's not the point. And, Sleeping Murder is a novel that I appreciate more and more as time goes on. And again, this is another one where if I were to remake this list 3 to 5 years from now, I would expect Sleeping Murder to break into the top half. I would expect it to probably be land somewhere in the low or the high 20s, maybe in like 3 to 5 years' time. So we'll see. Maybe if I'm still doing this channel, then I remake this list where it lands. But for now, Sleeping Murder lands at number 35. At number 34, and this is where the list jumps into what I would consider like the absolutely fantastic novels, and it gets very difficult to make choices here. Like something, again, has to fall behind the others. And again, this is also the last novel not to make the top half, but at number 34, I did select another Marple novel, 450 from Paddington. And as much as I love this book, I do feel like the mystery itself just isn't as good as the 33 books above it. There are tiny little issues with it, but I think Lucy Barrow is a fantastic character, one of the best Christie characters of all time. She was number one on my one time Christie characters video. I love a good unknown corpse mystery novel, and this one is far superior to the clocks. And I do like the mystery here and its mechanics, but I do feel like it could have used more. It's very intriguing watching Miss Marple like retrace the train routes, and that's a lot of fun. But I do think it could have used more Miss Marple and more cluing. Miss Marple is very passive here, and while she's often very passive, this felt like to a degree above the norm. And I think this book really could have used a lot more cluing and a lot more suspense and intrigue. It does lack a little bit in that regard. And I do question how solvable this novel is. I think it is solvable more so based on vibes than like actual textual information. But I love this book. It makes me want more, as if it's not like fulfilling the promise of a Christie novel. I just don't think, as great as this book is, it really can compare with the books left to be ranked. And the mystery plot just isn't complex enough. And the books all above this, they're doing the complex plot, they're doing the characters, they're doing everything. And again, I think this one just sort of gets left behind here at number 34. At number 33, the first book in the top half. Again, another tough choice to make here, but I did go with the Sitterford mystery, also called Murder at the Hazel Moor. And I moved the Sitterford mystery up on the standalones. I had knocked it down originally because of a fair play issue. However, at the time, a viewer informed me that the fair play issue I identified wasn't actually one, and it was enough to convince me. Usually I'm not influenced by a lot of the comments, but this one actually did. So keep commenting. You never know. I know some people always say, like, oh, I didn't want to mention this. Mention it, whatever it is. A criticism, praise, whatever. Mention it in the comments. Keep them coming. But because this one did convince me. And, I griped about a certain piece of evidence being called something until it was pointed out to me that that term wasn't really used in the 1930s. So I am satisfied. And I've always loved this book. The Sitterford mystery to me is that Christie novel no one knows about that everyone should be reading. It's never been adapted. I mean, it has been adapted, but let's be honest, that ITV Marple is not an adaptation. So we don't have any English language adaptations of this on the screen. And because of that, I think it's forgotten about. It's also a standalone. I don't think there's any recurring characters in this book. So it makes it a delightful hidden gem. Emily Trefusis is a fantastic character. I think the murder plot is so good, yet so simple. I love the use of the supernatural and the obfuscation that's going on. I think there are too many characters, which is a criticism I never really have. I mean, to me, you can never have too many characters, but this book has like literally dozens of main characters who are all important to the story or play some kind of not minor role in the plot. It's just way too much, and it feels like overwhelming at times. And there's a lot of side plots and red herring. It's overstuffed with content, and while that content is fun, it is a lot. There's actually like too much going on, which again sounds like a weird thing to say, but you all know what I mean. And I enjoy all the pieces of the plot and everything this book has to offer. It is a lot. It's like eating Thanksgiving dinner like every day of your life. But the Sitterford mystery is a lot of fun and very intriguing, and it's a hidden gem. And I always like hidden gems. To me, I'm always more interested in these books like no one talks about. Like again, I'd rather discuss Sitterford mystery than like Death on the Nile for like the 900th time. So this is definitely worth a visit, and it finishes in the top half at number 33. At number 32, the first better than average Christie novel, which is really saying something because so many of these books already, I think, are better than your average mystery novel. But by Christie standards, here we have The Secret Adversary, the first Tommy and Tuppence novel. And I only put two adventure thrillers in the top half, this one and another Tommy and Tuppence novel. And both of these do have more mystery elements to them. There is someone who has to be exposed. And while they aren't the only ones with this aspect, I think the mystery part of it is much more important. And I think the intrigue of Secret Adversary is the best of any of Christie's thrillers. This is not one of those thrillers she like slopped together to meet a deadline or because she was busy with other things. This is a carefully crafted plot with so many fun twists and turns. It never gets ridiculous or goes off the rails, and Tommy and Tuppence are both delightful. They always deliver, but especially in this one where we're introduced to them for the first time and they have this adventurous yet amateurish spirit about them. They aren't perfect in what they do, and it's very refreshing. And we also meet Albert for the first time. I'm a very big Albert fan. And I think Christie so expertly depicts the times through this duo, just out of the war, World War One, that is, no money, no prospects, and forging their way through London by the skin of their teeth in the 1920s. Young Tommy and Tuppence really exemplified the 1920s spirit of adventure. We see this a lot, even in other thrillers like, The Man in the Brown Suit. And Christie uses a lot of tropes for the first time in this book, and that makes them feel fresh, while in others they're stale. And I really like The Secret Adversary. It's one of my favorite thrillers. It's competently plotted, engaging, and exciting. I know Christie isn't always her best in these thrillers, but I think Tommy and Tuppence deserve representation in the top half. So The Secret Adversary lands at number 32. At number 31 is a novel I've always loved, and I think maybe it's a little high on this list, but I've always loved it, and that is The Moving Finger. And I think this is an excellent novel. And again, I think you can argue The Moving Finger has a lot more in common with books like a few tiers lower, like Dead Man's Folly or Dumb Witness. Very good books, very intriguing novels that are somewhat flawed. And I do think the mystery is a little light here, but I think it's good quality. And I enjoy this novel more than like Dead Man's Folly or Dumb Witness. This is actually one of my personal favorite Christie novels. I don't mind the very little cameo appearance from Miss Marple. It's really not that unusual for Christie, although, again, this is far less page time for her main detective than, you would have liked for Miss Marple. And, I categorize The Moving Finger as a Miss Marple, again, to be honest, really more of a standalone. And I think the characters are very solid overall. Dr. Griffith, Amy Griffith, just great characters. Jerry and Joanna are a lot of fun. Even the smaller characters like Partridge and Mrs. Barton and Miss Ginch all have their moments. Unfortunately, I think the murderer is very dull personality wise, probably the weakest character in the novel. And, I think the clues are excellent, the story is excellent, and the scene of, Megan's makeover is awkward, and Megan herself is not particularly a great character. But I think overall, the idea of someone spreading poison pen letters in a small village is really intriguing. And again, this is a very common trope in Golden Age mystery novels, and I've always loved them. I think they always deliver, and the way Christie uses them in the murder plot is very clever. To me, I look at The Moving Finger as your very solid country village mystery. It's really the one of the first books I think of when someone says a country village murder. I can't place this one any higher because it is a little simple and there are some issues in the execution, but I don't think Christie is doing a lot of like zany creative plots here. She executes the story competently, again, some holes here or there. But again, I just think also like her other books, there's a higher degree of difficulty to pull off than this one. So I have The Moving Finger here at number 31. At number 30, and we're returning to a bit of a streak of Poirot novels here that are very good, but again, not the best. And at number 30, probably a surprise. I suspect most people would suspect this would be higher, but I have The Hollow. And I know people thought I had The Hollow too low on my Poirot rankings, but as I said at the time, The Hollow was at one point my least favorite Christie novel. It has grown on me over the years. Again, my opinion of it now is a lot higher than it ever was before, but it's still, I don't really connect to like the sort of romantic feel to this book. It's very like Mary Westmacott-esque without being a Mary Westmacott. It tries to do both the Christie and the Westmacott. Specifically, I don't care for like the Midge Edward stuff that takes up way too many pages, but the rest of the book is fantastic. I mean, the character work Christie executes here is fantastic. John Christo, Henrietta Severnake, Lydia Ann Gattell, Veronica Cray, Gerda Christo, all fantastic characters. All of them have been ranked very highly by me in the past. These are some of Christie's very best character work, and I love how much the characterization there is in this struggle for John Christo between his wife and his mistress and his ex girlfriend, and Mrs. Crabtree is a very good and interesting but minor character, one of Christie's best like tertiary characters. And I think you could argue that the mystery itself is a little light and simple, but that's sort of the point. This is one of those ones where Christie, is focusing more on the character than the plot mechanics, and it fits the murderer very well. Again, this is a good example of murderer matching murderer. And I think Christie really accomplishes everything she set to do with this novel. I know this is probably one of her favorite novels. I know a lot of people love this novel. My appreciation of it grows as the years pass. But again, it's still just not one of my absolute favorites. Again, my personal enjoyment of a novel is only just one factor, but still, I think most readers would have this novel quite a bit higher. But I stand by some of my criticisms of it, and I have The Hollow here at number 30. At number 29, and I feel this is low for this novel, but again, I'm at the point of this list where I have to pick something. Decisions had to be made, and here I put Mrs. McGinty's Dead. And this is one of those books I recommend to new readers to start Christie with, because it's just like a typical novel that's well executed and fun. And that's basically my opinion of this novel. I think it has a lot going for it. I always love these murder in the past novels that affect the present. Mrs. McGinty was murdered because she recognized someone from this article about past female murderers, and I think that's very well done. I think there's very good obfuscation in this book as well. I can't get into it because it's a spoiler, but this book doesn't really end the way you think it will. And I'm not usually a fan of like these like innocent person is about to be hanged trope, because they, usually all in the end just the same way with that person being innocent. But I did find the James Bentley scenes here compelling, with Poirot trying to help him even though he doesn't want help, and Poirot is just really struggling to do the right thing here. Like, he doesn't like James Bentley, and he's struggling to help him. But the characters here, again, that's probably the weakest point of this novel, is the characters, the one-time characters. Not many standouts here, a lot of them just sort of blending together. And I've always loved the Ariadne Oliver content in this book, where Christie just does not hold back using Mrs. Oliver about how much she hates like collaborating with other people, and how she hates all the changes they want to make for her books to the stage. Like, Christie experienced this a lot. There's a lot of good like Sven Harrison content here from Mrs. Oliver, with her just railing and ranting over and over again about this like stage play she's making and all the changes Robin wants to make with it. Again, this book is a lot of fun, and it's a very solid novel. Again, it probably is one of these ones that doesn't necessarily like stand out in the grand scheme of the Christie canon, but still, it is excellent. And Mrs. McGinty's Dead comes in at number 29. At number 28, and again, this is another particularly tricky spot here for me. I would have assumed this novel would have been higher, but I did go with Sparkling Cyanide, and we're breaking away from the Poirots for a little bit. And I think this is a novel that has fantastic characters, a great plot, and smooth writing. Unfortunately, there is a bit of a plot hole I've talked about before. I'm not going to spoil it. I wouldn't say it's fatal to the novel in the way it is in Sat Cypress, but it is noticeable. Although I can somewhat overlook it because the characters and the plot itself are just so much more redeemable than that one mistake. But again, the characters are great. I wish the mystery hinged more on their personalities and human nature than the physical clues, but that's really such a minor knock, because there's so many great characters here. I mean, the Faradays, just absolute standouts. I think the setting and tone are excellent here, with this being a particularly like luxurious and glamorous and glitzy novel, and it maintains that throughout the book. Again, the Faradays, fantastic characters. I don't know why Colonel Race is in this book. I have to be honest, I've never been like the biggest Colonel Race fan, and every time he's in a book that's not the man in the brown suit, I'm just kind of like, why are you here? again, he just has a habit of showing up in random stories and does nothing of particular interest and then just seemingly runs off. It's very bizarre, but in retrospect, I think there is room sort of higher up for Sparkling Cyanide, but and also lower too. I think you can make that argument as well. But I think this is such a fun story with excellent characters, and it's extremely well executed. The setting, the tone, these like very small character moments. These are some of Christie's most developed characters. So I think this placement is warranted here at number 28. At number 27, returning to another Tommy and Tuppence novel. In fact, this is the highest ranked Tommy and Tuppence novel, N or M. And I've always looked at N or M as the best of the Beresford novels. I think it best demonstrates who Tommy and Tuppence are and has the best mystery of their novels. This is mostly a thriller set during World War II, really Christie's only novel when you can feel the war happening around the characters. Usually, Christie loves to deal with the aftermath of World War II, the food rationing, the state of the world and the state of England, and I love that. I've said that before. That's my favorite sort of like era of Christie. But this, we are in the midst of the war. There's no denying it. The fighting, the espionage. It's very well depicted. This is very dramatic here, and a very uncertain novel. A very sort of, you don't know where it's going, just like the war. This is a very pivotal time in British history, and here we have the middle-aged Tommy and Tuppence, still young enough to be active. It's not like Postner and Fate, but they're sort of older and they're sort of overlooked now. And we have, of course, their antics of Tuppence being Mrs. Blenkinsop and Tommy as Mr. Meadows. And there's kind of like fumbling their way through undercover assignment, trying to find German spies. And I think of all the four Beresford novels, NRM is the one with the most mystery content. It has the most clues. It's the most entertaining, and it's the tightest written. As a thriller, again, I don't have a lot of issues with it, but as a Christie novel, again, it is a thriller. Christie's just better in the mysteries. So, we also have Albert here again. Can't forget Albert, one of my favorite characters here. But again, I have N or M here at number 27. At number 26, we have the world's first historical mystery novel, allegedly, and that is Death Comes as the End. And this is a bit of an odd one where it's a mystery novel, but it's not really a detective novel. There's very little detection going on here, but what I love about this novel is how much Christie plays to the themes of most of her writings, that people are the same everywhere and every when. And in ancient Egypt, the characters are motivated by the same things they are in 1940s England and the United States, and even 2026. Greed, lust, fear, all of those things present. I love the setting in this one. We get such good descriptions of life in ancient Egypt. I feel like I'm there when I'm reading this book. And the mystery is no slouch either. I sometimes feel this novel gets overlooked for its plot. Like, everybody remembers it, oh, that's the historical one in ancient Egypt, and oh yeah, I like that one. But it's like, I don't think the actual like mystery itself is that well celebrated, and it should be. I mean, we have a lot of deaths in this one, lots of murders, lots of very creative murders as well. We have poisoned ointment, one of my favorites of being smothered in mummy linens. I look at this novel as a very fun one that's very different than like your standard mystery novel fare. Again, I think maybe you can quibble some of the characters aren't as bright or distinct as they should be. And, I don't think that's necessarily an issue here as it is in some other novels. But I've always loved this novel a lot, and so I have Death Comes as the End here at number 26. At number 25, we're actually staying in the same relative region of the world with Appointment with Death, which is another of these novels I think is more in line with your like typical Christie novel, possessing a very strong and entertaining mystery. Again, this is another one that like I would have guessed would have been higher on this list, but again, it's getting very dicey here. And we have Poirot and Petra Jordan investigating the murder of one of the strongest Christie victims ever in Mrs. Boynton, a tyrannical matriarch of her family. She hates her, and everybody hates her, and she relishes that. And Poirot issues himself a challenge that he can solve her murder in 24 hours. And I think the misdirection in this novel is excellent. I always love love a good chaotic red herring, and I think the characters are fantastic. My one sort of quibble, not even really a quibble, is that a lot of the good character work goes to waste when the solution is revealed. Again, this is not necessarily a novel where everybody's personalities sort of play into, I mean, certainly the personality of the victim. This is actually one of the best examples of like using the psychology of the victim to solve the crime. But I do think a lot of the character work for the others sort of doesn't matter, and that's a bit of a shame. And again, it's not that like this is an unsatisfying solution, but it does feel like maybe all the work Christie put into it didn't quite pay off. And again, there's a a stage version of this novel that I actually think the solution is much better for. And that's always something like in the back of my mind with Appointment with Death, is that like, why didn't you just use the stage play solution? It's so much better. Again, that's not really a knock against the novel, but it's always something that bothers me about this book, but it's a very minor thing. So I have Appointment with Death here at number 25. At number 24, we're back with another streak of Poirot novels, starting with Three Act Tragedy. And this is another novel here with just an absolutely fantastic piece of misdirection, absolute genius solution here. And I know I've complained about it from like an in-universe perspective, that maybe this plot wasn't necessary and didn't make much sense. But I think in terms of toying with the reader, which is arguably more important, it really excels. And I haven't like abandoned that criticism, but I think I have softened on it quite a bit. The entire novel sort of rests on, that, which maybe is an issue, but I really think the twist here is strong enough to justify that. It really is mind-boggling and incredibly devious. And we have Poirot and Mr. Satterthwaite, of all people, from the Mysterious Mr. Quinn collection, investigating three murders, one in each act, of course. And I think this is a good novel for both of them. I mean, this novel probably has, I think, more issues than the ones just before it, but I think the twist is strong enough to justify the higher placement. It's also a very, easy to read novel. It's very entertaining. There's no slogging. The pacing is very good. And again, even that one issue, I don't think it's at all damaging to the book. It's just a little bit of a knock here, but nothing detracted seriously from the book, because, when you have that kind of problem, you really do have to like sort of sift through the book to look for it. It's not one of those ones that's like really obvious, but still, again, that shouldn't overlook how great this novel is, how much fun this novel is, and how much like devious this novel is. There's also a lot of humor in this one, which is, I think, an underrated one. I don't think people look at Three Act Tragedy as sort of one of Christie's funnier novels, but there are some great one-liners here and there. So I have Three Act Tragedy at number 24. At number 23, and this is a novel that I really just didn't know what to do with this one, and that is Lord Edgware Dies. And for me, the confusion comes from the fact that I immediately saw what was happening with this novel on my first read, and I think that's a problem. However, this novel is excellent despite that, and if you don't see through it, boy, are you in for a treat. And it's still, even knowing, what was happening, it was still an excellent story. I mean, the story being told is wonderful. And despite this being a Christie novel, I think there is a lot of value to be held in the story as opposed to the mystery. The characters are wonderful. Jane Wilkinson, Lord Edgware, Carlotta Adams, fantastic one-time characters. We have excellent content from Poirot and Hastings and Japp. The mystery mechanics are also very good, except for that one little thing I won't mention because it's spoiler, but it really did make me see through the whole thing, which was unfortunate, but I still enjoyed it. Like, I still think it was a good twist, and I still think the mechanics were very strong. And I really think Lord Edgware could have been a top 15 or even a top 10 novel, but it's at number 23 because of that. And I think, like, putting it next to Three Act Tragedy, which has not the same problem, but similar problem. I just think that makes sense because these are both really top-notch novels. Again, they do have one issue that's probably more of an issue for me personally than it is for readers at large. Again, I can be very nitpicky at times, but again, still, I love this book, and it really should not deter anyone from reading this. So I have Lord Edgware Dies here at number 23. At number 22, another Poirot novel that I really love, and again, still has a little bit of that same issue here, and that is Evil Under the Sun. And I enjoy this novel a lot. It's a very fun romp with Poirot at the Jolly Roger, with all these crazy and chaotic characters at the resort, like the Gardeners, the Redferns, Miss Brewster, the Reverend Lane. I think the murder plot is a lot of fun. It's very creative and has a lot of moving parts and a lot of just really gonzo mechanics here. Is it solvable? Maybe. I mean, I do think it's a little hard to solve here. Again, not that difficult to solve is bad, but I do think it's just sort of borderline a bit on the impossible. But there are a lot of clues, and there are a lot of good clues as well. But I do think this novel has a little bit of a flaw, mainly the sheer amount of luck necessary to pull off the murder plot. It works, it is possible, but you have to stretch your imagination. And I do think this one, you can stretch it enough where it's not like too much of a stretch. But again, in the very, very best, truly elite Christie novels, you don't have to do that. Even the ones that have like gonzo mechanics like this one. And you should always be willing to sacrifice a small amount of credibility for the sake of the plot. And again, there's some clunky red herrings in this one, but none of those overshadow how much fun the novel is. And to be fair, a lot of my affection for this novel comes from the Ustinov film, which I really enjoy. It's one of my favorite Christie adaptations. But again, in terms of the novel itself, this is an excellent novel. It really is top notch here. Although, again, I just think some of the other novels are better. So I have Evil Under the Sun here at number 22. At number 21, we're heading back to Miss Marple for the first time in a long time here with A Pocket Full of Rye. And this is a novel, in my opinion, has gone up quite a bit over time. The best thing about the novel is the avenging fury Miss Marple after the rather crude murder of her former maid Gladys, plus I guess the less important murders, at least to her, of Rex and Adele Fortescue. And watching Miss Marple take this case as emotionally as she does, I think is an excellent look into the true character of Miss Marple, this shrewd older woman hell-bent on justice with a more sinister side to her that betrays that outwardly like grandmotherly appearance. She is not a cozy old woman who solves mystery, and I think A Pocket Full of Rye best demonstrates that. I think the murder mechanics are very strong here. To be fair, there is a bit of a silliness because this is one of those nursery rhyme ones, and sometimes those nursery rhyme ones go like, eh. It's like a very serious novel, so I think sometimes it feels disjointed with the nursery rhyme here. But I think the murder here is just absolutely fantastic plot wise. And also, this novel has perhaps the best ending to any Christie novel of all time. It is so like delicious, and it's a little bit of sinister too, and I just love it. Again, I think I did have it number 2 on when I did the top 10 like best Christie endings, but it really was like a tie for number 1. It's really good. I know a lot of people do consider this the best ending to any Christie novel. Again, this novel is strong on all aspects. It is so good, and it lands at number 21. At number 20, and now we're entering a small tier here of novels that I think are excellent on a sort of like technical level and quality wise, but are ones that I don't necessarily have a lot of like personal affection for. Not that I don't like them. Again, I do like them. They wouldn't be this high if I didn't. But, I can't say these are my favorite novels to read. But here at number 20, we have Cards on the Table, which I think is the novel that probably most encapsulates what I mean here. This novel is excellent in quality. The mystery is incredibly well thought out, well planned. The characters are very strong, and despite the limited suspects, this is very hard to solve. We only have 4 suspects, but Cards on the Table, it's never like my to-go-to book when I want to read Christie. It is entertaining, don't get me wrong. It's not boring, but I don't have a lot of personal affection for this, and maybe it's because like bridge is a major part of the novel, and I don't play bridge. By the way, you don't really need to have a lot of bridge knowledge to understand this novel. I know some of you out there were trying to like teach me how to play bridge when I was reviewing this novel. Again, did not stick, and I do think there are moments here that are just really fantastic. I mean, there's a lot of very good Mrs. Oliver content. This is her first novel appearance. This is her first actually appearance with Poirot. I think she meets Poirot for the first time here, and we get all her great insights into writing and how she pretty much like hates being a writer, but she loves it as well. And there's so many good dynamics between like Poirot and Mrs. Oliver and Poirot, and like Mrs. Lorimer is a great character here. They have a lot of great scenes. We even have like Superintendent Battle here, who I think this is the best content for Superintendent Battle, who sometimes I feel like isn't the most interesting out there. Again, we do have Colonel Race, who's Colonel Race again, but again, he's not a net negative for the novel. But I think Cards on the Table is a masterpiece in detection and in deduction, so it lands at number 20. At number 19, a rather depressing novel in Curtain, The Final Poirot. And I've said this before, but I don't think Curtain is anyone's favorite Christie novel. It's extremely depressing in tone, in mood, in content. I know a lot of people's like dismiss this book for certain reasons I won't spoil, but I think the readers who do that and the readers who refuse to read this novel are missing out on quite a few genius plot points. I don't think this novel gets the credit it deserves in terms of the mystery and in terms of the writing. There is a lot of excellent writing and tricks in this novel. Christie is so good at foreshadowing, for example, in this book, and I would argue it's probably the best novel she does it with, and even better than certain other masterpieces higher on this list. And I think the characters are all essential to the mechanics. There's no extraneous characters. They all fit in. There's no extraneous subplots. We have a lot of nostalgia with Poirot and Hastings reuniting at Styles to hunt once more and for the final time. I think the worst thing about this novel is maybe there's some like uncomfortable like semi-eugenics talk from Judith and perhaps some ableism, even though I don't necessarily think so. I think Judith is probably putting on an act. And even though this is a very well-known novel, it is a bit of an unsung one. Nobody likes to talk about it. Nobody's favorite, like I said. But I think that sort of overlooks just how good this novel is. The mystery is so delightful. It's so good. And it's very depressing. And I know, a lot of people read for escapism. They don't want to read about depressing things. But, you're missing out if you're someone who does that. I know a lot of people like, oh, I've never read Curtain. I don't want to read Curtain. I know what happens. But again, you're missing out. And for those reasons, I have Curtain here at number 19. At number 18, and again, this is another novel I would have guessed would have been higher coming into this list. But at number 18, I have Endless Night, which is actually the most recent novel remaining, and it's also the final and highest novel in this short tier I described at number 20. I never select Endless Night when I want to read a Christie. It's not like my desert island read here, yet this is a fantastic novel, especially tonally. Whenever I read this book, I always just picture a fog sort of covering the scene. It's a little ominous, a little spooky, despite not really having supernatural themes outside of Mrs. Lee. And again, this is another with a really fantastic story and a very good mystery. Just the way Christie tells this story is so good. And this is Christie doing everything she does well, and it's noticeable as a standout because it came a time in her career when she wasn't doing all of this as well as she used to. And in many ways, I look at Endless Night as Christie's last, like, hurrah. Curtain and Sleeping Murder were written much earlier, and she's putting out a lot of sort of matte novels in the 60s and 70s. It's unusual in many regards. And, it's also not her typical mystery in style or content. She has a working class young man as her first person narrator, Michael Rogers, and he's an excellent character, really one of the best one time Christie characters ever. And I have almost no issues with this novel, but I do think, again, my personal affection for it maybe isn't as high as it is. Like, again, this is not one I'm, bringing to a desert island, or this is not one I'm like, oh, well, I'm in the mood for Christie, let me pick one off my shelf. But again, this is such a well executed novel. And again, this is another one that I think maybe people overlook when they're reading Christie. So I have Endless Night here at number 18. And at number 17, and now I think we're really starting into like the truly elite Christie titles. Again, to me, elite is like an exclusive word that I don't like to throw around. We still have like 17 novels to go here. But again, this is such good books starring forward here that it's very hard to rank them. But number 17, I have Taken at the Flood. And, I know this isn't necessarily a lot of people's favorite novel either. I don't see this novel discussed a lot. It's rarely making, I think, lists this high up. But I love this novel. I love a good Christie mystery set in the aftermath of World War II. Christie uses the time setting so brilliantly in this novel, and the mystery is full of twists and blindsides at every turn. We have suspicious deaths left and right, dysfunctional family dynamics, a country village, a love triangle. I think this novel has fantastic characters in David Hunter and Lynn Marchmont, even the other characters, even though they could blend together a little bit, but I think as like a group, I think they're very strong. And Christie uses a lot of her old tricks in this novel, but she uses them in new and inventive ways that one doesn't even notice she's repeating them or won't see them coming. And everything about this novel is done super well. It's only at number 17 for a few reasons. I think it's one of the few left that I would say is not an iconic Christie novel. I don't know how many like casual fans of Christie would name Taken at the Flood off the top of their head. And again, I think like Raleigh Claude is a pretty bad character, and he's an important character. There's also the ending, which is really bad. I don't mean like the solution, I just mean the way the book ends. Probably the worst ending to any Christie novel. I don't think it's like detrimental to the novel, but definitely leaves a bad taste in your mouth. And that's really the reason why it's here at number 17. At number 16, another novel I really love. Okay, it does have a little couple issues, and that is The Body in the Library. And for me, this is another Christie firing on all cylinders. The mystery is fantastic. The characters are great. I love the settings. I love the shenanigans in St. Mary Mead with Mrs. Bantry and Basil Blake. I love the hijinks at the Majestic Hotel. I love the farcical nature of the story where Christie is lampshading everything that's ridiculous about mystery novels in a very lovable way. It's not critical. It's almost a parody. And, by this time, Christie had earned the right to be, to write this parody of herself. I mean, she actually mentions herself in the novel. And again, it's just a lot of tropes presented in a sort of not critical, but again, in a farcical way. I think the murder of Ruby Keene is very fun and exciting. I love the twists involved. I do think there are some minor plot holes, like here and there, that again do prevent this novel from moving higher up on the list. Again, it's not egregious like the likes of like Sad Cypress. I do think Miss Marple is perhaps a little pushed aside as well in this one, but there is a lot of fun with Dolly Bantry, and of course, every time Mrs. Bantry is in it, it's a good time. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the incredibly great opening of this novel. It is the greatest opening to any Christie novel, with Mrs. Bantry dreaming about winning the garden show, and then the maid like bursting in and goes, "There's a body in the library." It's really iconic, and it really sets the tone for just how, I don't want to say ridiculous this is, but how humorous this is. And this is a very dark novel as well. I mean, Christie often writes very dark and sinister novels, and you almost don't even notice how sinister they are because of how much humor is here. And again, The Body in the Library, it's a lot of fun. It's not perfect, but I do love it a lot. I read it all the time. It's such a quick and easy read, and it lands here at number 16. At number 15, a novel sort of along the same lines, an excellent novel with some minor flaws that do prevent it from being higher up on the list, and that is Ordeal by Innocence. And, this is another just fantastic story held back a tiny, teeny bit by some like the weird adoption stuff that's going on. Again, that's also not really unusual in a Christie. And this is one of those ones where Christie is focusing on the innocent and how this shadow of guilt hangs over the innocent until the true culprit is found. And this is something she does a lot, but I think it's most prominent and best done in Ordeal by Innocence. It's a very clever plot with some very innovative yet simple twists and mechanics. Some of the characters aren't as strong, maybe, but I think the murderer is also just not one of Christie's best, which is probably the largest knock against this novel. I think the other characters are very strong. They are mostly adopted siblings, and again, weird adoption stuff there. But the family dynamic is very interesting here. I like this sort of having the rug pulled out from under them because of certain events that happen. I don't think any of it detracts from the good work that's being done here, and both with the plot and thematically, this is a very well constructed novel. It is actually, I think, one of Christie's best. Again, I wish, to be honest, it could have been in the top 10, but again, gonna have to get a little bit nitpicky here. Ordeal by Innocence lands at number 15. At number 14, I think this might be a surprise to a lot of you that this is this high, but here I have The Pale Horse. Now, I would agree that the last few novels I've talked about are probably more interesting and tightly constructed than The Pale Horse. I think they're certainly more iconic. But to me, The Pale Horse stands above them for its uniqueness. It's nothing like any other Christie novel plot-wise. It's very unique in the mechanics and in the construction and in the storytelling. The Pale Horse contains Christie's best use of the supernatural, or I guess more accurately, use of supernatural themes and occurrences as misdirection. This is Christie's spookiest and darkest novel, and it's not like she doesn't do this elsewhere. She does have a lot of short stories, sort of along similar lines, but I think again she does it best and most interestingly here, and that is cut through with some humor from Mrs. Oliver, of course, but all this covers up more or less a traditional mystery plot, and a lot of the novels in this top echelon of the list are sort of bigger concept novels rather than more, I guess, standard mysteries, even if they aren't necessarily typical of Christie's canon. But I mean, The Pale Horse is so good. The atmosphere of it is great. The characters, I think, are fairly strong. I actually think they're underrated characters. I mean, none of them made my top one time Christie characters or anything like that, but I think we have a very chilling murderer reveal here. I just think the cleverness of this novel really makes it stand out. Again, I can't think of any other golden age mystery just like this one. I mean, the twist is just fantastic, and because of all this, I land The Pale Horse right here at number 14. At number 13, another standalone with Towards Zero, which, as a concept, I've always loved. I love the idea of all the events of a story leading up to the solution at the so-called 0 hour. And you might be thinking, well, aren't all mystery novels like that? And the answer would be yes, but no. I mean, this novel does it so deliberately. No other novel does it so very clearly and distinctly. The blatant idea that the murder isn't the true story, it's all the events and all the characters leading up to that event, very much matches my personal philosophy on mystery and detective fiction. I've spoken a lot about how I hate how sort of nowadays there's always a mandate. The murder has to happen right away. And, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't need to. And as for the story itself, it is excellent. And we have truly one of the greatest villains in detective fiction, just expertly drawn when that mask comes off. A truly great Christie killer. The plotting is so good. The clues are so well thought out and so devious. This is a very devious and wicked novel. Some of Christie's best cluing, but the true story here is in the characters, all of whom are well drawn. Audrey, Kay, Neville, Mr. Treves, Mary, Thomas, Ted, all of them so well drawn, so interesting, and all of them serve a role in the novel. No one is extraneous. No one is there just to be there. No one's there as just an extra suspect. And this is ostensibly a superintendent battle novel. And to be honest, he's probably the weakest character of the book. But to me, he's just sort of generic police inspector. It's easy to forget about him. And again, just come across a little more than generic police, but this is a must read of detective fiction. I think this is a very good one to read early on, like if you're just starting detective fiction, because it provides a lot of sort of basis of the foundation of the genre. And the story itself, what a roller coaster of a ride from start to finish. So Towards Zero lands here at unlucky number 13. At number 12, we have a novel that I often see in top 10s, and I think for me, this novel has one specific reason keeping it out of that top 10, and that is the ABC murders. And I do think this novel is a classic of detective fiction. I think it has reached icon status as an absolute mind blowing revelation at the end. And the ABC murders sort of set the standard for serial killer detective fiction going forward, where it is so much more than just a series of murders, or I guess as the term was back then, multiple murders. I think nowadays a new reader of this novel might see it coming simply because, again, this twist has become far more commonplace, almost meta at this point. But again, I assess novels in the context of when they were written and to a lesser extent of how they hold up over time. And this is an iconic entry into the world of detective fiction, and it deserves all the praise in the world for that and for the story. However, my one issue with this is that I don't. It's sort of weird here, but I don't think the ABC Murders has a lot of rereadability quality to it, and it's tough to decide how much that really matters because it's not necessarily a flaw. Like, authors don't write books anticipating 20 reads on, but unlike almost every other Christie novel, every subsequent time I read the ABC Murders, I never feel as if I gained or learned anything new. It's the same static experience on a reread. It's every time we read like another mystery novel, you're like, "Oh, I didn't see that the first 30 times I read this book." I don't have that experience with the ABC Murders. I think most of the one-time characters also not particularly memorable outside of course, Alexander Bonaparte Cust, who is a great all-time character. And I think that's a product of the format and the structure of the novel, not really allowing for a lot of character development. But there is no doubt this is a spectacular novel, very much deserving of the heaps of praise it has earned over the past 90 years or so. So the ABC Murders lands at number 12. At number 11, and I really did try to squeeze this one into the top 10, but I just couldn't get it in there. And it may surprise some of you longtime followers of this channel because I've made it known this is my personal favorite Christie novel, and that is Hercule Poirot's Christmas. And I think when I assessed this novel previously, my personal enjoyment of it did take over, and I think I probably overcompensated for that. But this novel brings me so much joy. I read it every Christmas season on the days of the chapter. I mean, my edition is basically in shreds, and I think there is something to say for that. Personal enjoyment is only one factor of many I use when assessing a novel, and I do think that in the past I've sort of let that take over for this novel specifically. But still, the murder plot of this novel is genius. It's a rare Christie locked room. There are excellent clues here, and the twist is really very unique. I love good dysfunctional family in a mystery novel, and the Lees definitely up there as one of the more dysfunctional families. I find the setup to the mystery so good, with Simeon Lee being probably one of the most ruthless victims in detective fiction, and the whole scene with all the noise and the shattering and the chaos is very iconic to me. I think you could argue maybe there isn't enough Christmas in this novel, and that's fair. It's not like the be all and end all. And I'd also see the argument that this novel just cannot hold up to the top 10, which I think is also fair as well. I mean, the top 10 are really just iconic mystery novels, and Hercule Poirot's Christmas, not so iconic in the general public. To me, it is. And again, definitely my personal enjoyment of it is putting it this high. I know a lot of other lists probably have it somewhat lower, but this is my list, and I really enjoy this novel, and I do think it is underrated on a sort of mechanics and technical level as well. I don't think it gets the credit for the locked room solution and some of the characters being as fun as they are. So I have Hercule Poirot's Christmas here at number 11. At number 10, we have the top 10. We have six Poirots, two Marples, and two standalones. And at the number 10, we have one of those standalones in Crooked House. And This novel is best known for its twist ending, but I think readers are doing a disservice if they simply consider this novel in the context of that twist, because Christie did not write this novel with that twist in mind, and to do so, I think glosses over a lot of the other great work that's going on, specifically with the characters and with the writing. The oppression of Brenda and Lawrence, the overdramatic Magda, the austerity of Clemency, the failures of Roger, the antics of Josephine. There's so much going on here, and our narrator, Charles Hayward, is very good. He himself, a little bland, but again, as the narrator, that's okay. And he tells the story so well. We have excellent characters here. I don't think there's a bad character in this novel, at least like a major character. And there are so many twists with all the shenanigans, a second murder, an attempted murder, a very shocking ending. And I'm not just talking about the murderer reveal. The cluing, while sparse, is really good. There are very good clues in here. You're not inundated with them, and I think Christie pulls off such a simple mystery here. But simple does not mean basic, and it doesn't mean plain, and it doesn't mean boring. It means simple without frills, and that's very difficult to pull off. A lot of authors do put all the bells and whistles in it, and Christie doesn't have to do that here. Crooked House is one of those rare nursery rhyme titles that both fits the nursery rhyme but doesn't become cheesy or ridiculous. And like the last couple of novels, I think you can debate if Crooked House has iconic status. I mean, to me, it does. And, it's getting close, at least. I think it's starting to be recognized as an iconic Christie more recently. So here I have Crooked House at number 10. At number 9, continuing on with some unsung hidden gems of the Christieverse with Five Little Pigs, which is a Poirot novel and may very well be Christie's best novel in terms of characters. The characters, those 5 titular pigs plus Amyas and Caroline Crail, are just truly elite characters, many of them in my top 30 one-time Christie characters. Amyas was a top-ranked victim in the Christieverse. The murderer was in the top 10 when I ranked every killer. This is a novel I recommend to people who say Christie wasn't a good writer. There's this misconception that Christie was only good for creating these mysteries, and her writing left a lot to be desired, and that's garbage, and this is a novel I use to refute that. The writing is excellent. The way Christie tells the same story over and over again in different point of views without it becoming stale or slogging, and laying in some of the best clues she ever crafted is amazing. The ending is so good and so brilliant. You could really just eat it up. Everything about this novel is incredibly satisfying, and it all fits together so well. And the reason why I don't have this higher is because, the murder plot itself is very simple. That's not bad at all, but there are some very, very small inconsistencies that pop up because Christie is so focused on the characters and the writing, and the mechanics aren't getting like the full attention. And also because the very, very best mystery novels do all of these things. They have the great character work, but they also have the complex murder mechanics without little plot holes. And Five Little Pigs murder mechanics are on the simpler side, probably the simplest of any novel in the top 10. It's just the other novels above this one are firing on all cylinders, and Five Little Pigs is missing just that one little element of the complex murder plot. And it's not to say the murder plot is not good, because it's excellent, and they're so good. The clues, I think about these clues all the time. If you watch a lot of my other videos, I'm talking about these clues all the time. I can't mention them because I don't want a spoiler, but there are little tiny pinpricks here that, again, at this part of the list, you really got to get nitpicky. So I have Five Little Pigs here at number 9. At number 8, another unsung Poirot, After the Funeral, and I have very fond memories of my first read of this novel. After the Funeral was the first Christie novel I ever read where I did not know the solution going into the book, and I was just completely floored by my read in a very good way. It really hooked me in and started my trajectory into the Christieverse. I was mind blown by this book, and that probably influences my decision to put this at number 8. Most people probably would have After the Funeral maybe in the high teens, but I don't, and I don't make videos just to rehash what other people have already done. These are my opinions, and this is just such a delicious novel with all the dysfunctional family intrigue, a really gruesome murder, the mind blowing solution, one of the best murderers in the Christie verse, one of the best victims in Cora Lansquenet. I just find this novel so devious in so many ways. I mean, the way Christie really strings you along, and she's always stringing you along, but this one feels like really wicked. And I wish I could describe so many of these clues and the twists and all that, but again, this is spoiler free. And of course, I have to mention the time setting in the aftermath of World War II, and that time setting driving so much of the plot. Christie uses it so well. Probably the best use of the time setting in any Christie novel. And the post World War II era is my favorite time period to set mystery novels, just because of all the changes and all the things going on. And Christie really takes advantage of those changes in this book. And After the Funeral cannot exist in any other time period, as evidenced by the adaptations that move the story to another time and flop pretty hard, in my opinion. I do think the novel could probably use more Poirot. Again, he's not in it so much, but I did love him as Monsieur Pontellier and his disguise being seen through immediately. And what Poirot is there is very good. And, I just love this novel. Again, it was the first time Christie wowed me with her writing. So After the Funeral comes in at number 8. At number 7, back to Miss Marple with The Murder at the Vicarage, and the very first Miss Marple novel. And in so many ways, Murder at the Vicarage is a bit of a redo of The Mysterious Affair at Styles, but Christie was more experienced as a writer by this point and thus produced a better product. This is what I was talking about with Styles, that Christie it suffers from being the first Christie novel because Christie improved on her work since then. And I think Murder at the Vicarage just clears up a lot of the issues Styles had. It's technically not the introduction to Miss Marple, as that came in the 13 Problems, but I do think it's a fantastic intro novel for her. This is the best look we have at the dynamics of St. Mary Mead and people like Miss Hartnell and Mrs. Price Ridley, the sort of gossip channel that exists in the village. The Clements are fantastic characters. Technically not one-time characters, but this is their only major appearance, with the Reverend being our excellent first-person narrator and his young wife Griselda providing so much humor and snark. We have other great characters like Lawrence Redding and Anne Prothero, Colonel Prothero, an all-time great jerk victim. We have a wonderful twist. This novel is simply working on every single level: the plot, the clues, the setting, the twists, the characters, both recurring and new. If I have one criticism of this novel, is that there's a lot of red herrings, and mostly fun red herrings. Like, don't get me wrong, I do enjoy red herrings, and most of them are good red herrings, but again, emphasis on mostly, but there are one or two side plots that aren't the greatest, and the novel does feel overstuffed at times, like there's too much going on. I know that's sort of like a weird criticism to have, but that's something Christie pointed out herself much later on when she was sort of going over her older works. That was something she thought about Murder at the Vicarage, and I agree with that. So again, I feel comfortable pointing that out because Christie did so. But Murder at the Vicarage is just really an iconic novel. It is the first Miss Marple novel, and I think it's, The Mysterious Affair at Styles just so much better in every single way. So I have Murder at the Vicarage here at number 7. And at number 6, we are finishing up Miss Marple here with the highest ranked Marple novel, A Murder is Announced. And this novel is near universally considered the best Miss Marple novel, and it's not difficult to see why. Everything about A Murder is Announced is just so charming. The village of Chipping Cleghorn is wonderfully depicted. The dynamics of the village come into play. Once again, that excellent time setting of the aftermath of World War II is very important. The setup here is one of Christie's greatest, with Miss Blacklock and company planning on having visitors because someone posted in the newspaper a murder will happen at her house of Little Paddocks, and sure enough, people show up out of naked curiosity. And there's so many good clues in this novel. I mention them all the time whenever I talk about clues. The novel has a lot of characters, and they're all extremely well drawn and entertaining. Every one of them is a standout. Miss Blacklock, Bunny, probably the most heartbreaking victim in a Christie novel, Patrick and Julia, Miss Murgatroyd, Miss Hinchcliffe, the clear lesbian couple, Edmund Sweatenham, Bunch Harmon, just all fantastic characters. And of course, Miss Marple. This is an excellent novel for Miss Marple. She has so many village parallels that she uses, and her knowledge of human nature and village life just expertly come into play. She has a lot of just really fun digs at Raymond West and his wife, neither of whom actually appear in the book. And this is also the first appearance of Dermot Craddock and the beginning of his relationship with Miss Marple. Craddock's initial hesitance to near blind devotion of Miss Marple is certainly something to behold. This is really the first time Christie's sort of allowing Miss Marple to spread her influence out beyond St. Mary Mead and Colonel Melchett and Sir Henry Clithering. It's like the Marple fever is spreading. And I think more than any other Christie novel, A Murder is Announced is pure fun. There's a lot of antics and shenanigans and humor, and while those are often features of Christie novels, I would argue this probably does it the best. This isn't a novel that's giving like a lot of like profound messages. Not that there aren't messages, but this really is a novel meant to entertain rather than make a statement. And I think sometimes literature is taken too seriously, so it's very refreshing to have this novel where that isn't really the case. And from start to finish, this is such a fun read. It's a long novel, but it's an engrossing novel and a very quick read. So I have A Murder is Announced here at number 6. At number 5, back to Poirot with a novel I saw the complaints about how low I had it on my original Poirot ranking, and you know what? I did move it up, both reluctantly and willingly, and that is Murder on the Orient Express. And I stand by everything I said in my original Poirot ranking about this novel and all the criticisms I had of it. However, I did change my mind in that I don't think all that really matters that much. I think also I was just sort of burnt out on Orient Express. It's a very oversaturated, and that every time there's a new like Christie thing, it's Murder on the Orient Express. Every time there's a new like film series, first one, Murder on the Orient Express. New video game, Murder on the Orient Express. New jigsaw puzzle, it's Murder on the Orient Express. Merchandise, Murder on the Orient Express. But I really shouldn't have held that against the novel itself on the ranking, and I also should have held the fact that I don't think this novel has a lot of reread purpose. Every time I read this novel, it's the same experience over and over again, as opposed to all the other Christie novels where on a reread you're always seeing new things and there's new things to experience, but that doesn't change this book's iconic status. This is one of the most popular novels of all time, and it didn't get there by accident. There is an emotional connection readers have with this novel, not necessarily to the specific injustice that occurs in the novel, but injustice in general. Human beings have a natural inclining toward justice when that justice is not met. It invokes anger and revenge in us, and that's what this novel is all about. It resonates on a personal level in a way really no other Christie novel does, or even other mystery novel does. Is extremely relatable and human. And I think that's why it's so popular. Not the mind-blowing twist, not the claustrophobic snow trap train, which are all very good. It's the theme of injustice and taking justice into your own hands when you've been kicked down. It's a dream for people to be able to correct wrongs that hurt them. In terms of the mystery itself, there are a lot of good clues here. It's more technical than many other Christie mysteries, but still a lot of fun. I think some of the characters maybe lack. As a whole, the cast of characters is strong, like as a group. Individually, I think very few stand out. I mean, Mrs. Hubbard, a notable standout, but you also have some like lackluster ones like Hildegard Schmidt, Cyrus Hardman, not really having any real characterization or anything unique about them. And it's true, there is a specific reason for that, but still, and contrary to the comments I've seen, I really do love and appreciate this novel. I know I see, like, sometimes people talk about in the comments how I don't like this novel. That is not true at all. I love this novel, and, there's really only, like, 4 Christies I don't like. It is a truly elite mystery novel, and the criticism I had of it, I still do. I just don't think they're important anymore when I rank these books. So I have Murder on the Orient Express here at number 5. At number 4, and this is certainly the outlier of the top 5. I think the other 4 in the top 5 have near universal name recognition and are generally considered iconic mystery novels. This one isn't as well known, and that is Peril at End House. And a few years ago, I made a video determining what the most Christie-ish Christie novel was, and it turns out it's Peril at End House. This novel demonstrates everything Agatha Christie does best. I know when people think of Agatha Christie, they think of Murder on the Orient Express, Death on the Nile, and then there were none, ABC murders even, but those novels are not your typical Christie novel. Peril at End House is. Not every Christie novel, in fact, most Christie novels don't have wild, gonzo big ideas. They're actually fairly simple and highly realistic, and they don't mislead the reader with grand concepts. They mislead the readers using very subtle tricks of human nature, of wording, of lies. And Peril at End House is such a simple novel, yet it's extraordinarily clever. And when I say simple, again, I don't mean plain, I mean unadorned with frills. There's not a lot of cluttering going on. The cluing is so good. I'm constantly talking about this novel's clues in practically every video I make about clues. We have an excellent character in Nick Buckley, but also Freddie Rice. We have a lot of fun Hastings Poirot antics going on. We have an extremely clever mystery and plot here. I know someone is going to mention this novel's twist is one that's fairly easy to see through, but this novel is nearly 100 years old at this point. It did the twist first and arguably best. The fact that this twist has entered the meta is because of this novel and Agatha Christie. This is the original and it deserves the credit. I do not like subsequent Christie novels for like overusing twists and making them very transparent, but I will not knock the original. No one discredits Neil Armstrong for being first on the moon just because other people stepped on the moon afterward. I always enjoy these Christie novels like Peril at End House because Christie demonstrates she doesn't always need the big flashy twist and these ridiculous contraptions to make a good story. And it's because she is so good at the human nature and drawing characters that makes this novel really stand out to me. So Peril at End House comes in at number 4. At number 3, still with Poirot, and you know what? Now I'm going to contradict myself with a novel that does have a lot of big gonzo hijinks, and that is Death on the Nile. And I know I just said Christie is at her best when she's being simple and clever, but that shouldn't discount a plot like Death on the Nile, which is far more complicated and intricate. And as good and devious as the mystery plot is, that's not all Death on the Nile has going for it. This cast of characters is wonderful. The love triangle amongst Simon, Lynette, and Jackie is Christie's best love triangle. Just near perfection from start to finish. And each of those three characters just wonderfully individual. You know, Poirot has such a good relationship with Jackie, and it's one that I think like the popular adaptations have never really depicted accurately to the text. Like his relationship and dynamic with Jackie is just so fascinating to me. But the other characters are a lot of fun as well. Like the Allertons are kooky, Salome Otterborn really just iconic. Rosalie is good. Miss Van Skyler also just so much fun. I could do without Colonel Race and Ricchetti, as I always have to mention. And of course, this novel has reached iconic status, probably more so because of the Peter Ustinov film than the actual novel itself. But still, it's an icon of detective fiction. And we also have to talk about the magnificent setting. This is Christie's longest novel, I believe, but it is such a breeze to read. It really could have turned into a travelogue, but Christie is able to capture the Egyptian setting without going into lengthy descriptions. And I know a lot of critics sort of knock the plot for being convoluted and perhaps unrealistic or like not the best way to do this, but I think everything has a logical explanation and also doesn't really matter to me because nothing is unrealistic or ridiculous. Like, is this maybe the smartest plot in the world? No, but again, this is a mystery novel. Like the boring, simple plot, you don't want that. You want this like crazy plot here. And I just think everything about this novel is so good. I mean, the opening is so good where we're with all the different characters as they, make their way to Egypt and all of that. And it's just so good. Like everything about this, except the Colonel Race subplot. I hate the Colonel Race subplot, but that doesn't really, take away from this novel. So I have Death on the Nile here at number 3. At number 2, and we are finishing Poirot here with his top ranked novel, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. And I don't believe a lot of people really understand the importance of this novel to mystery literature. This is the novel that made Agatha Christie a household name. And sure, she was well known before then, but it made her more famous. But it also transformed the genre. Mystery novels were no longer the little red-headed stepchild, but now a force to be reckoned with on the literary stage. The average reader discussed this novel like a literary great. It was a very controversial novel because of its twist, and while it's not the first mystery to use this twist, it was the first one to make the big splash. You had a war of sorts breaking out, with some people saying Christie cheated and broke the rules, while other critics defended and praised her and imitated her. And the twist is one of those ones that may be less impactful and surprising now because it is much more common and accepted nowadays, but it wasn't in 1926. And again, it's the Neil Armstrong analogy I mentioned before. You don't knock the original because of the imposters that follow. But the twist is what this novel is best known for, and it allows subsequent rereads to be entirely new experiences when you know the solution. Again, that's often the case with mystery novels, but with especially this one. I've read this novel countless times, and each time feels brand new, and I see things I never saw before. And I know this book has its detractors, but I think those arguments largely fall on the slightest scrutiny. I do not buy into the idea that this novel only has the twist going for it and is just a generic mystery outside that. You can't separate the novel from the twist. I mean, first of all, why would you do that? That's like saying, like, oh, this comedy wasn't very funny when he took out all the jokes. Like, you can't do that. It's just a marvelously crafted mystery with a lot of great clues. The characters really shine. James and Caroline Shepherd being two just absolutely standout one-time characters. Caroline being the loose prototype for Miss Marple. Dr. Shepherd is such an engaging and unique narrator. He tells the story like no other first-person narrator does. You really have this great country village mystery with Poirot struggling to grow vegetable marrows and getting very angry with that. And while I don't always think Poirot is best in the country village mysteries, this setting works for him this particular time because he is so out of place. That's sort of the point there. He's not supposed to be there. And I really have nothing but praise for this classic Christie. So The Murder of Roger Ackroyd comes in at number 2. And at number 1, maybe no surprise, certainly not to me, is And Then There Were None, which I not only consider the best Christie novel of all time, but also the best mystery novel of all time, and perhaps the best novel of all time. And it may seem a little pedantic to make this incredibly long video just to come up with And Then There Were None as number 1. Like, anyone could tell you that. Any casual fan could tell you that. However, I don't think that makes the distinction unwarranted. This is the greatest mystery novel of all time, although I would caution it's not really a detective novel, and that's just one of the aspects that makes And Then There Were None so unique. There's no detective working to solve this mystery. There's no one really working to solve this mystery. I mean, technically, there are like two generic inspectors at the end for a moment, but they also don't solve it. And Then There Were None is also widely credited for being the first slasher, giving birth to that genre of film and literature. But what makes this plot so great is the plot itself. 10 people trapped on an island, tricked there and forced to confront their own past misdeeds and battle their guilt as they are murdered one by one, as the 10 little soldiers slash Indian slash whatever poem taunts them. This is Christie's grandest plot, the plot hardest to pull off, and not only does she succeeds on a level higher than she does in any other novel. This was a high-risk, high-reward book, and Christie won. This plot that Christie sets up is not only just really credible, it's ridiculous and overly complex and requires a lot of luck and circumstances outside of the murderer's control, yet Christie is able to create the situation and circumstances that makes it incredibly believable. It all works. It all fits in. The atmosphere just takes over, and the fear and the intensity consume the characters and perhaps the reader as they act irrationally, and the murderer is able to take advantage of that. The character work is so good. All 10 of these characters have very distinct personalities, and they each have a crime fitting their personalities. They are so well developed. Even Anthony Marston and the others who are out early all have little quirks and character moments I remember so well. These are some of Christie's strongest characters. Even the characters we don't meet on the page, like Hugo and Cyril, really come to life, but the atmosphere and tone is really what makes this novel shine. It's dark, it's spooky, it's intense. No matter how many times I read this book, I still sense that feeling of anticipation as the poem moves on to the next verse. That China figurine disappears and another body piles up. It's just so intense. Words cannot describe, and Christie is diligent in making sure everything is laid out clearly and concisely. This is not a difficult read at all, despite all of this. This is one of my favorite novels of all time, but I never provide this answer when people ask me because it's so cliche. I always give another name, but it wouldn't be right to have anything else at the top spot. So, and then there were none lands at number 1. And that is it for this video. Thank you for sticking with me for over 2 hours now, I believe. Really my longest video yet. And, let me know in the comments what you think about my ranking, what your rankings, what you would have changed. I'm already like doubting a couple of placements, but once I locked in the order, I locked in the order. Otherwise, I would just be moving everything around for years and years. And in the future, I want to redo some of those earlier rankings I did from other authors as well. Again, the order has changed. My opinion of them has changed as I've done the retrospectives for them. And that's also like some of the reason for the changings that some of the books I didn't get to reviewing yet. So they didn't have the benefit of me assessing them, more carefully. So again, the order probably will change in the future. And I also would like to do other like Christie novel rankings, maybe like ranking the novels by the characters and by other aspects that I think could be fun. So anyway, and at the end of this video, after I sign off, I'm going to post the individual list for by series so you could more clearly see the order of the Poirots, the order of the Marples, and the order of the standalones, which are all the non-Poirot Marples. Anyway, thanks for listening. And again, we'll have many more videos in the future, hopefully. Maybe not as long as this one. Again, maybe. I am planning some very big videos that's going to take me forever to do. I would like to review and rank every Agatha Christie adaptation ever, but again, they keep adding them, so I don't know when that video is ever going to get made, if ever. But anyways, thank you for listening for all these years, and thank you for, the 2,000 subscribers. Until next time, Mystery Files.